I just walked out of prison after 9 years with $80 and a broken watch. But my enemies don't know I've been waiting a decade for this. While my treacherous wife and adopted son celebrate over the empire they stole, they have no idea that the 7-year-old granddaughter they despise holds a secret weapon. I wasn't defeated during those 9 years. I was simply waiting for the trap I set 20 years ago to finally tighten around their necks. My patience was a weapon, and today their stolen world collapses. The long game is over, and I have won. This story begins with patience. Before we start, drop a quick comment. What are you doing while listening? Working, driving, or taking a moment for yourself, I read every comment, and your presence here matters. Please note some details are fictionalized to strengthen the message. The lesson, the truth it carries, is what I hope stays with you. Here is the translation of the complete passage, including the dialogue. The November rain came down hard enough to blur the chain-link fence behind me as I walked out of Terminal Island Federal Correctional Institution with $80 and a watch that had stopped working 3 years ago. I did not turn around. I flagged a taxi and headed straight for the only place that still felt like my own, the old office complex in Queens where I'd started it all. I wasn't going there for nostalgia. I was going to see the enemy. Preston and Simone were hosting a private investor preview at the old office building, a calculated piece of theater, to show how much growth the company had achieved under their management. I stood in the shadows of the lobby, my cotton prison shirt soaked, my posture hunched in an old coat I'd scavenged. When Preston saw me, he didn't call security. He walked over, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, and stopped inches from me. The smell of his cologne was a sick contrast to the stench of the rain on my clothes. He looked at me as if I were a stain on his expensive marble floor, his eyes filled with a cold, hollow pity. Preston sneered each word, cutting like a blade. "Look at that pathetic, ragged state you're in. Don't you feel any shame? You don't deserve to breathe the air in this house, so get out of here before I have security throw you out like a bag of trash." The thing I found on Simone's phone was an email to Preston that ended with 3 words: "He suspects nothing." That was in 2014. I had 6 months to decide what to do with that information before the federal agents came. The hotel room smelled like industrial cleaner and the previous tenant's cigarette smoke, and through the thin walls I could hear the muffled roar of planes taking off every 4 minutes from LAX. $89 a night bought you yellow lighting, a bed with springs that creaked when you sat down, and a small table by a window that looked out at a parking lot where seagulls fought over discarded fast food. I did not mind. I had lived in worse places for the past 9 years. The front desk called my room at 2:30 in the afternoon. "My package for you, Mr. Whitfield." I went downstairs. The clerk handed me a blue envelope, thick and unmarked. I took it back to the room and spread the contents across the small table. 47 pages. 9 years compressed into 47 pages of surveillance reports, financial records, and very carefully documented betrayal. Leland Ashford had done exactly what I paid him to do. Leland was 61 years old. He had been a detective with the NYPD for 23 years before I hired him in 2014, 6 months before the arrest that no one else saw coming. I hired him for 2 reasons. First, because he was good at watching people without being seen. Second, because he did not ask questions about why a man with a $150 million company needed a private investigator to watch his own wife and business partner. My phone, charged now using the cord I bought at the airport convenience store for $12, rang once. "The envelope is at the front desk," Leland said. "Everything we discussed." "I have it," I said. "Last page. Read it carefully. The accountant, you knew him." I flipped to page 47. The name at the bottom stopped me for 3 seconds. Conrad Hawkins, senior forensic accountant, retained by Preston's legal team 2015 through present. Conrad Hawkins had been Vance Global's senior accountant for 11 years. A man I had paid well and trusted completely. A man who sat in a federal conference room in March 2015 and lied with a face like carved stone. Leland's report showed what I had suspected, but never confirmed Conrad was Preston's brother. Not by blood, but by adoption. Same last name, same loyalty, same willingness to destroy a man they had worked beside for over a decade. I read the financial section twice. Preston had signed 23 asset-backed loan contracts over the past 9 years, totaling $85 million. Every single one carried floating interest rates tied to federal benchmarks, rates that had stayed low for most of the decade but were now climbing. The loans were structured to strangle small payments at first ballooning obligations. Later clauses buried on page 18 and page 22 that gave lenders the right to call the full balance if certain conditions were met. 23 loans. Preston had signed 23 separate loan agreements, each one tightening the noose a little more. I had planted that debt structure 20 years ago when we first expanded into the East Coast. Small seed loans with terms that looked generous on the surface but had triggers embedded deep in the language. Preston never read past page 3 of anything. He trusted the accountants. He trusted Conrad. And Conrad had steered him directly into the trap I built in 1999. The irony was sharp enough to cut. Preston stole my company, but the company he stole was designed to collapse under the weight of debt the moment someone tried to take it without understanding the foundation. I set the report down and looked out the window at the parking lot. A plane screamed overhead low enough that I could see the landing gear. March 2015. That is when it all became real. The IRS came on a Tuesday morning with the kind of knock that tells you running will not help. 6 agents, 3 from the FBI. They had a warrant and boxes and the expressions of people who already know what they are going to find. They walked into the 34th floor conference room at Vance Global like they owned it. Crisp March light came through the windows overlooking the harbor. I remember thinking the weather was too nice for what was about to happen. The lead IRS agent was a woman named Caldwell. She wore a gray suit and carried a leather folder that she set on the table with the care of someone placing a bomb. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "we have documentation of systematic fraud spanning 4 years. Offshore accounts, falsified invoices, tax evasion structures designed to hide income from federal oversight." I sat across from her and said nothing. My lawyer sat beside me and said the things lawyers say when they know it will not matter. Then they brought in Conrad. He sat at the end of the table in a blue shirt and no tie. He did not look at me. He looked at Agent Caldwell and spoke in a voice so flat it could have been reading a grocery list. "Mr. Whitfield instructed me personally to structure these offshore accounts," Conrad said. "I have his written authorization. Every transfer was approved by him directly. I raised concerns about the legality in 2012 and 2013. He told me to proceed anyway. He had documents, emails with my name, transfer authorizations with my signature, memos detailing conversations we supposedly had about hiding revenue and evading tax liability. All of it was fabricated. All of it was precise. All of it was exactly what you would need to send a man to federal prison for 9 years. I should have felt something in that moment: rage, betrayal, fear. But I had already felt all of that 6 months earlier, staring at Simone's second phone in the middle of the night, reading emails that made it clear she and Preston had been planning this for years. I had already processed the shock. What I felt in that conference room was confirmation. The scenario I predicted was unfolding exactly the way I knew it would. When they read the arrest warrant, my lawyer leaned over and whispered that I should prepare for the worst. But I was not thinking about the worst. I was not thinking about the charges or the evidence or the 11-year employee who had just destroyed my life with perfect composure. I only thought one thing: his study. Did Norwood hear that? Norwood was the butler at the Lake Oswego mansion Preston bought in 2010. I planted him there in 2014, 6 months before the arrest. His job was simple: stay invisible, stay employed, and listen to every conversation that happened in that house for as long as it took. Simone's face looked different through the visiting room glass. Smaller somehow, like grief had compressed her into something I almost did not recognize. January 2016. I had been inside Terminal Island for 10 months. She came on a Tuesday afternoon when the visiting room fluorescent lights made everyone look sick and tired. She picked up the phone handset on her side of the glass partition. I picked up mine. "I'm fighting for you," she said. Her voice broke on the word fighting. "I know you're innocent. I'll wait." Tears ran down her face in clean lines, the kind that come from real emotion. Her hands shook when she pressed them against the glass like she wanted to reach through it and touch me. She said my name 3 times. She said she loved me. She said the lawyers were working on appeals and new evidence, and that this would not last forever. I watched her cry and realized immediately she was acting. Not because she was not hurting. She was. But her pain was not about me. It was about her. About the story she was telling herself, the role she was playing, the performance she needed to deliver, so that later, when everything came apart, she could say she had tried. She could say she had been loyal right up until it became impossible. I did not say much during that first visit. I let her talk. I let her cry. I said the things you are supposed to say when your wife visits you in prison, that I appreciated her coming, that I was holding on, that I believed the truth would come out eventually. All of it was true. None of it was about what she thought it was about. She came back 3 weeks later. Same visiting room. Same glass partition. Same tears. But this time I noticed something she did not realize. I could see faint chalk marks on her ring finger just below the knuckle. White residue from a pen I recognized, because I had owned one exactly like it for 15 years, a high-end fountain pen made specifically for signing financial contracts, the kind that left powder on your skin if you gripped it too hard while writing your name. She had signed something big that week. Something that required the kind of pen you only use for documents worth more than a house. I did not ask her about it. I let her talk about the weather and the lawyer meetings and how hard it was to sleep at night knowing I was in here. I let her perform. And when she left, I called Leland from the payphone in the common area and told him to find out what Simone had signed in the past 10 days. He called back 2 days later. Real estate transfer. She had moved herself onto the deed for the Lake Oswego property, the 8-bedroom mansion overlooking the water that we bought in 2010 as an investment. Preston's name was already on it. Now hers was too. 14 months. That is how long it took for her to stop pretending. The divorce petition arrived in early 2017, month 14 of my sentence. It came with a short letter on cream-colored stationery that probably cost $4 a sheet. "I can't keep my life on pause," she wrote. "I found someone who can be present in ways you cannot. I hope you understand. I'll always care about you, but I have to move forward." The someone, of course, was Preston. Leland confirmed it the same day. "She moved into the Lake Oswego house yesterday," he said when I called him from the prison phone. "Preston's already there, has been for 3 months apparently. Looks like they're not hiding it anymore." I stood in the common area holding the phone receiver, watching another inmate play cards at a table 10 feet away. The fluorescent lights hummed. Someone down the hall was yelling about commissary, the ordinary soundtrack of a place where nothing is ever truly quiet. "Tell me if he's changed my name on the gate plaque yet," I said. Leland paused. "The what?" "The iron plaque at the front gate. It has the property name on it. I want to know if he's replaced my name with his. Give me a day. He called back the next morning. He changed it last week, Leland said. The plaque now reads, Preston Hawkins Estate established 2010. Your name's gone. I thanked him and hung up. I went back to my cell and sat on the bunk that smelled like industrial detergent and 30 years of men who had slept there before me. I read Simone's letter one more time, looking at the careful handwriting that had once written grocery lists and birthday cards and notes that said she loved me. Names are funny things. They look like labels, but they are really anchors, and Preston had just tied himself to a ship I had spent 20 years filling with stones. He thought he was claiming an estate. He thought he was putting his name on wealth and property and the life he had stolen from me. What he did not understand, what he could not understand, because he never read past page 3 of anything, was that the estate, the company, the assets, all of it, was structured to collapse the moment someone tried to take it, without knowing how the foundation was built. The gate plaque said, Preston Hawkins Estate now. But every loan tied to that property, every contract connected to the business, every piece of the financial architecture Conrad had helped construct over 2 decades, all of it carried terms that would activate when the interest rates shifted, when the federal benchmarks moved, when the economy did what economies always do. Preston put his name on the gate. But he did not know that name with all the assets attached to it would be what strangled him later. I folded the divorce letter very carefully and put it in the small locker beside my bunk. Leland had asked if I wanted him to do anything about it. Legal countermeasures, asset freezes, anything. I told him no. Let Preston have the gate. Let him have the plaque and the mansion and the woman who used to be my wife. Let him think he won, because in 6 months, a blue-stamped letter with no return address would arrive, and it would tell me Norwood was still there, still listening, still recording every word spoken in that house. And that would be worth more than any gate plaque ever could be. The letter arrived on a Tuesday during mail call, and I knew what it was before the guard handed it to me because of the small blue stamp in the upper left corner, where a return address should have been. 18 months. It had been exactly 18 months since I told Norwood to send confirmation, only if his cover was still intact, only if he was still there, still listening. I took the envelope back to my cell and waited until evening count was over. I sat on my bunk and opened it carefully. The page inside was blank, completely blank. Except for one thing, the impression of the Vance Global Company seal pressed into the paper with enough force that I could feel the raised edges under my thumb. The seal showed the logo I had designed in 2001, the interlocking V and G that appeared on every contract and invoice the company had ever sent. The characters were still perfect. The impression was clean. Norwood Saxon had not been discovered. He had been the household butler at the Lake Oswego mansion for 15 years, hired long before Preston ever stepped foot in that house. When Preston moved in and claimed the estate, Norwood continued his service with the same unassuming efficiency, making coffee, managing staff, standing in corners during dinner parties, with the posture of someone who had perfected the art of being present without being noticed. What Preston did not know was that Norwood answered to a different master. I had hired him in 2014, 6 months before the arrest, with one instruction: stay employed, no matter who lives in this house, and document everything you hear. The blank page with the company seal meant Norwood was still there, still listening, still recording every conversation, every phone call, every moment of carelessness that happens when people believe the help cannot hurt them. I folded the letter and put it in the small locker beside my bunk. 9 years from now, I will remember this moment. Because that very butler, the one who flattered Preston every morning and refilled Simone's wine glass every evening, will be the one to press the final button. But that was still in the future. In 2017, all I had was confirmation. The plan was holding. 3 months later, Leland called with news that broke something I had been careful to keep intact. "Your daughter lost her position at Silicon Sky yesterday," he said. Official reason: ghost account irregularities, alleged misuse of company resources. The firm is conducting an internal investigation. I stood at the payphone in the common area. Eleonora Whitfield was 28 years old. She had been working as a marketing manager at Silicon Sky, a mid-sized tech firm in Silicon Valley. She had built a career I had been proud of before everything collapsed. "Ghost accounts," I said. "Is it real?" "No." Leland paused. But I dug deeper. Simone went to their headquarters 3 weeks ago. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. An inmate 2 phones down was arguing with someone about money. "She went herself?" I asked. "Herself," Leland confirmed. "Posed as a concerned party with information about irregularities. Gave them just enough to start an investigation. Just enough to make them look at Eleonora's accounts and find things that could be interpreted as suspicious if you were already looking for a reason." I closed my eyes. "She fabricated the evidence." "No. Simone's smarter than that. She pointed them toward real transactions, real account activity, then framed them in a way that made them look wrong. The accounts were legitimate. The framing was poison." "We did," I asked, though I already knew. "Because Eleonora is your daughter," Leland said. "Because she has a job and income and connections. Because if you ever get out, if you ever challenge any of this, Eleonora is the one person with resources who might be able to help you. Simone is cutting that off. She's isolating her, making sure your daughter has no money, no professional network, no way to support any legal action you might take. She went to Silicon Sky herself. Not through lawyers, not through intermediaries. Herself. Simone had traveled to Silicon Valley, walked into a corporate headquarters, and systematically destroyed our daughter's career with the same precision she once used to plan anniversary dinners. She was not just passively benefiting from my imprisonment. She was not just living in the mansion with Preston and pretending I had never existed. She was actively attacking the people I loved to make sure I would have nothing and no one when I walked back out. "Where is Eleonora now?" I asked. "Still in the Bay Area, looking for work. It's going to be hard. Silicon Sky is well connected. The allegations are following her." I should have said something strategic. I should have asked Leland to monitor the situation, to document everything, to build a file we could use later. That is what I had been doing for 18 months, thinking 3 moves ahead, converting every piece of bad news into potential evidence, staying cold and clinical and focused on the long game. But standing at that payphone, listening to Leland describe how my ex-wife had flown across the country to destroy my daughter's livelihood, I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel since the day the federal agents walked into my office. I felt it break. Not rage, not even hatred. Just a fracture in the part of me that had been holding everything together by refusing to care about anything except the plan. "Now keep watching her," I said finally. "I need to know she's safe." "Understood." Leland hung up. I stood at that payphone for 3 minutes after the line went dead, the handset still pressed against my ear, listening to empty static. That was the first time in 9 years I felt something break inside. Not because of me, but because my daughter is paying the price for a crime she didn't commit. The break lasted 3 days. Then I put it back together because breaking is expensive and I could not afford it. The photograph was small enough to fit in my palm, black and white, slightly blurred, taken through what looked like a hospital room window from across the street. Leland had included it in a manila envelope that arrived during year 3, tucked between 2 pages of typed surveillance notes with the kind of clinical detail that told me he knew this one would hurt. "Your daughter gave birth to a girl 3 days ago," the report read. East L.A. Community Hospital. Father's name is not on the birth certificate. Ivy Whitfield was 3 days old in that photograph, a small face barely visible through the hospital glass. And already she had lost years with a grandfather who did not yet know her name. I read the rest of Leland's report sitting on my bunk, with the same fluorescent lights humming overhead that had been humming for 3 years. He left 6 months after the baby was born. She's raising the child alone in a one-room apartment on $2,400 a month. Office manager position at a dental clinic in East LA. It's all she could get after Silicon Sky. $2,400 a month, in a city where rent alone would take half of that. With a newborn who would need diapers and formula and doctor visits and all the small expensive necessities that add up when you are doing it alone, because the father decided 6 months was long enough to pretend he cared. I looked at that photograph for 20 minutes without moving. The image was grainy, taken from too far away, with equipment that was good but not perfect. I could barely make out features, but I could see enough to know she existed. Enough to know my daughter was raising her in a place I had never seen, in circumstances I could not help, because I was sitting in a cell paying for crimes I did not commit, while the people who framed me lived in my house and stole my company, and now they had taken this too. Not the child. They could not take her because they did not know she existed. But they had taken the years, the first words, the first steps. Every birthday I would miss. Every moment that would pass while I stayed here and Eleonora struggled alone. And my granddaughter grew up thinking this was normal. This is the second reason. The first reason was justice. The second reason was a 3-day-old girl in a blurry photograph who would turn 6 years old before I walked out of this place. 5 years. My granddaughter will grow up 5 years without knowing she has a grandfather. I will take that back. I put the photograph under my pillow next to the other pictures Leland had sent. Over 3 years images of the mansion of Simone and Preston at charity events of the gate with my name replaced. I kept them as reminders, as fuel, as evidence that forgetting is more dangerous than remembering. 2 weeks later, Leland called with different news. Remy showed up at the office yesterday, he said. Preston had him sign something offshore property acquisition anonymous partners. Standard shell company structure, but the signature liability all falls on Remy. Remy Hawkins was 29 years old when he signed his first fraudulent contract at Vance Global, believing he was helping the father who had raised him, unaware he was being positioned as the final sacrifice in a conspiracy that began before his birth. I had raised Remy from the time he was 3 years old. I had taught him to ride a bike and helped him with algebra homework and paid for the college education that got him the Wharton MBA he was so proud of. For 26 years, he called me Dad. For 26 years, I believed he was mine. What kind of contract, I asked. Acquisition of commercial property in the Caymans through a Delaware LLC, Leland said. 3 shell companies deep. The ownership chain is deliberately obscure. But Remy's name is on the final signature page. If anyone investigates, he's the one holding liability. I knew then they were planting a bomb on my son, making him the signature on every fraudulent transaction, positioning him as the fall guy so that when the structure collapsed, when the federal investigators came looking, they would find Remy's name on documents and contracts and wire transfers. They would build a case against him while Preston stayed clean. They were making him the scapegoat, the boy they raised, the son who had called Preston uncle for 29 years before Preston became something else entirely. Does Remy know what he's signing? I asked. No indication that he does, Leland said. He trusts Preston completely. Of course he did. Because that is what Preston does. He finds the people who trust him, and he uses that trust like a weapon until there is nothing left but signatures on paper and liability that lands on someone else. I should have felt something for Remy in that moment. Sympathy, maybe, or protective anger. I had raised him. I had been his father in every way that mattered except one. But here is what they did not know, and what I had never told anyone: Remy is not my biological son. I found out in 2011. A routine medical screening that required family history. Blood types that did not match. A quiet conversation with a doctor who suggested genetic testing if I wanted certainty. I got the certainty. Remy was not mine. He was Preston's and Simone's, conceived during an affair that had been going on longer than I wanted to calculate. Raised in my house under my name, calling me Dad, while his real father stood across from me at board meetings and shook my hand. I never told Remy. I never told anyone, because telling would have meant confronting, and confronting would have meant showing my hand before I was ready. Now Preston was planting criminal liability on his own biological son, without knowing that I knew. Without understanding that the scapegoat he was creating carried his DNA, not mine. I put down the phone and looked at the photograph of my granddaughter one more time before sliding it under my pillow next to the others. The problem is, Remy isn't my biological son, but I'm the only one who knows that, and I haven't decided what to do with him yet. The decision about Remy could wait. I had 4 more years to decide whether to save him or let him burn with the rest of them. The Forbes interview transcript arrived in a manila envelope from Leland, with a yellow sticky note that said only 3 words: "Read it carefully." I read it carefully. The headline was set in bold at the top of the page: Preston Hawkins building an empire from Queens to the nation. The interview ran 6 pages. The journalist asked questions about leadership and growth strategy and what it takes to build a logistics company in a competitive market. Preston answered with the confidence of someone who believed every word he was saying. "I built Vance Global from a garage in Queens," he said in the second paragraph. "One truck, one dream. I remember loading the first shipments myself, working 18-hour days, sleeping 4 hours a night because that's what it took. Our first major contract was with the Port of Oakland in 2001. That's when I knew we had something real." I read that paragraph 3 times. He stole my memories. Not just the company, not just the money. He stole the story of how I built something from nothing and told it as if it were his own. The garage in Queens, the one truck, the 18-hour days and 4 hours of sleep. Those were mine. Every single detail was mine. And he had taken them and worn them like a costume in a magazine that would reach thousands of people who would never know the difference. But he made a small mistake. Port of Oakland. The first major contract was not Port of Oakland. It was Port of Long Beach. I remember because the negotiations took 3 months, and the signing happened on my birthday in 2001, and I drove down to Long Beach from Los Angeles in a rental car, because my own truck was in the shop. I remember the smell of salt water and diesel fuel. I remember the dock supervisor's name was Martinez, and he had a scar above his left eye, and he shook my hand and said I reminded him of his son. Preston said Oakland. He misremembered, or he never knew, because the story was not his to remember. Only the real person who lived it would know the difference, and I would use that. He was not just sitting in my office. He was wearing my history like a suit that did not quite fit and telling my story to people who would never know the difference. But I knew. And I was keeping score. I set the transcript down on my bunk and called Leland from the payphone. "Did you read it?" he asked. "Port of Oakland," I said. "That's evidence. Document it. If we ever need to prove he's lying, that's how." "Already done," Leland said. "But I have other news. They acquired your shares." I was quiet for 5 seconds. "How?" "Two, 3 proxy companies. Cayman registration. Shell structure designed to obscure ownership. They bought every share you owned through the court-ordered asset freeze. Preston is listed as CEO effective yesterday. Simone is on the board. Your name is completely removed from the shareholder list. I stood at that payphone watching another inmate play cards at a table 15 feet away. The fluorescent lights hummed. Someone down the hall was yelling about commissary. The ordinary soundtrack of a place where nothing is ever truly quiet. The proxy filings, I said. Did they include transfer documentation? Yes. Full ownership transfer. Notarized. Filed with the state. Good, I said. Leland paused. Good. They don't know that I included a clause in the company charter 20 years ago, I said. A biometric veto. Any ownership transfer of more than 20% without my physical signature triggers automatic federal review. It's buried on page 47 of the original incorporation documents. Preston never read that far. No one did. So every proxy filing becomes evidence, I finished. Evidence that they transferred ownership of a company without the founder's consent using shell companies to hide the transaction. It's fraud. And it's documented. Every loan he signs is another link in a chain he does not see. And at the end of that chain is an anchor I buried 20 years ago. Leland was quiet for a moment. Then, one more thing. Preston signed a loan agreement this morning. How much? 12 million. Asset-backed. Company property as collateral. Floating interest rate tied to federal benchmarks. The clock just started. I had structured those loan terms in 1999 when we first expanded. Small interest rates at the beginning. Rates so low they looked like gifts. But tied to federal benchmarks that would rise eventually, and when they did, the payments would balloon. The terms looked generous on page 3. The triggers were buried on page 18. The clauses that would strangle were on page 22, written in language so technical that most people skipped over them. Preston never read past page 3 of anything. 12 million, I repeated. With options to extend, Leland said. The bank is offering additional credit lines if the company continues to perform. Preston thinks he's securing capital for growth. He's securing a noose, I said. When will it tighten? When the federal interest rates rise. When the benchmarks shift. When the economy does what it always does. I looked at the phone receiver in my hand, the same phone dozens of inmates used every day, leaving their sweat and their desperation on the plastic. How long do I have left here? To 4 years, 3 months, Leland said. If you get full credit for good behavior. Ma vart years, I said. By then that 12 million will have grown, and the company he thinks he owns will be drowning. I folded the Forbes transcript very carefully and put it in the small box under my bunk where I kept everything that mattered. The photograph of Ivy Simone's divorce letter, the blue-stamped confirmation from Norwood, and now this. Proof that Preston was telling my story as his own, and that same week, Preston signed the first asset-backed loan. The clock started ticking. The clock did not just tick. It accelerated. Preston signed his second loan 4 months later. His third 6 months after that. By year 5, the pattern was clear. He was borrowing faster, borrowing more, using company assets as collateral each time, because the banks trusted the name on the paperwork, and the revenue reports looked strong, and no one was checking the fine print on page 22. By the time Preston signed his 7th loan, the numbers had stopped looking like opportunity and started looking like a trap he could not see. Leland sent me a 20-page financial analysis in year 5. I read it twice in my cell under fluorescent lights that never quite turned off even at night. 7th loan. The report began. 85 million total. All company assets as collateral. Interest rates variable tied to federal benchmarks. He's signing bigger amounts each time, 12 million, then 15, then 18. The banks are offering more credit because the company appears to be growing. It was growing. Preston was good at operations. He knew how to manage logistics, how to negotiate contracts, how to keep clients happy. Under different circumstances, he might have built something real, but he was building it on a foundation I designed to collapse. What he did not know, what he could not know, because he never read past page 3 of anything, was that 20 years ago I buried a clause in the original partnership development contracts, a floating interest rate mechanism that activated only when company property was used as loan collateral beyond the original strategic expansion plan. The clause was technical, invisible unless you were looking for it. Written in language that referenced Section 12.4.7 of the Federal Commercial Code and subsection amendments from 1998 that almost no one remembered existed. But the mechanism was simple. Every time Preston signed a new asset-backed loan, the interest rate on every previous loan adjusted upward by a fractional percentage tied to cumulative debt exposure. One loan at $12 million with a 3% rate looked manageable. But when he signed the second loan for $15 million, the first loan's rate increased to 3.2%. When he signed the third, both previous loans adjusted again. By the seventh loan, the first loan was carrying an interest rate of 4.8% on what had started at 3%. Exponential growth, hidden, compounding with every signature. By the time I get out of prison, the total debt will exceed the company's market value. He will be occupying an empty empire and not know it. I called Leland from the payphone to confirm the math. The mechanism is working, I asked. Perfectly, he said. Preston's accountants see the individual loan terms. They don't see the cross-referencing adjustment clauses because those are buried in the development partnership documents from 1999. By the time someone realizes what's happening, the debt will be unserviceable. How long? If federal interest rates rise the way projections suggest, Leland said, the debt bomb reaches critical mass in about 4 years. Right around the time you're scheduled for release. 4 years. The same amount of time I had left to serve. I hung up the phone and went back to my cell. The financial analysis went under the mattress with everything else. Leland had sent over 5 years' loan documents, surveillance reports, photographs of Preston and Simone at events I used to attend. But that same week, a different envelope arrived. 3 photographs. No note. Just Leland's handwriting on the back of the first one, Manhattan Playground, April 2020. Ivy was 2 years old. The first photograph showed her standing next to a wooden bench, one small hand gripping the edge for balance. She wore a yellow jacket and jeans with grass stains on the knees. Her hair was dark, pulled back in a small ponytail that someone Eleonora, I assumed, had tied with a ribbon. She was standing, 2 years old, and she was already walking. The second photograph caught her mid-step, moving away from the bench toward something outside the frame. Her face showed concentration, the kind of focus that comes when a child is learning something new and has not yet decided whether to be afraid of falling. The third photograph was the one I would remember. Ivy sat on the ground near a sandbox, holding something in her small hands. I looked closer. A toy watch. One of those plastic children's toys with bright colors and oversized numbers. But she was not playing with it the way most children play with toys. She was studying it. Her eyes were locked on the watch face, examining it with the kind of stillness I recognized immediately because I had seen it in mirrors for 50 years. She was not pretending to tell time. She was trying to understand how the watch worked, how the hands moved, what made it tick. She was observing, analyzing, recording. This is what they took from me. Not money, not the company. This the first steps, the first words, the small hands holding things and trying to understand how they work. I looked at that photograph for 20 minutes in my cell. The fluorescent lights hummed. Someone 2 cells down was coughing. The ordinary sounds of a place that never sleeps, because sleep requires silence, and Terminal Island never gave you that. Her eyes were like mine. Not like Eleonora's, like mine. The way she observed the world with the stillness of someone who is recording everything, who understands that details matter, that small things become important later when most people have forgotten them. She was 2 years old, and she was already watching, already learning, already developing the habit of paying attention that would years from now, in ways I could not yet predict, become the evidence that would help me reclaim everything they stole. I did not know it then. But that toy watch in her hands was practice for something real. I put the financial documents back in the envelope and slid them under the mattress, where I kept everything Leland sent. But the 3 photographs I kept separate in a small plastic sleeve I had gotten from the commissary. I kept those 3 pictures under my pillow for the remaining 4 years. Those photographs stayed under my pillow through year 5, year 6, year 7, and into year 8. Every night I felt them there, a small reminder that the world outside these walls was continuing without me, but not erasing me entirely. The letters from Eleonora came every month for the first 3 years, and then they started getting shorter in a way that had nothing to do with running out of paper. Month 18. She wrote 3 pages, single-spaced, detailed. She told me about Ivy learning to stand, then walk, then climb onto furniture, with the kind of determination that required constant supervision. She told me about the small apartment in East LA where they lived, the dental office where she worked as an office manager, the playground 2 blocks away where Ivy liked to feed pigeons. She wrote about small victories, a raise at work, finding a used stroller at a yard sale for $8, Ivy's first word, which was not mama, but up. I read those 3 pages 10 times the day they arrived and kept them in the plastic sleeve with the photographs. Month 22. The letter was 1 page. Same handwriting, same careful tone, but compressed. She mentioned Ivy turned 3 years old. She mentioned work was fine. She mentioned the weather was getting warmer. Everything important was implied in the spaces between words. The struggles she did not name, the hardships. She did not detail the exhaustion she did not admit. Month 30. The letter was half a page. Ivy was healthy. Work was stable. She loved me. That was all. Month 36, the letter was 3 lines. Dad, I'm okay. Ivy is growing up. I love you. I sat on my bunk, holding that letter for a long time. The fluorescent lights hummed. Someone down the hall was watching television, the sound bleeding through thin walls. The ordinary background noise of a place that never gave you silence when you needed it. 3 lines. I read that letter 100 times. Not to hurt, but to remember this is the real price. Not the company worth $150 million. Not the house or the cars or the bank accounts. It is what is hidden in those 3 lines. Years of suffering compressed into 12 words, because she is protecting me from knowing how bad it really is. Because she understands that I cannot help her from inside these walls, and telling me the details would only add weight to a burden I already carry. Dad, I'm okay, means she is not okay, but she is surviving. Ivy is growing up means my granddaughter is 4 years old, and I have never met her. I love you means she has not given up on me even though I have given her every reason to. The following month, no letter came. I asked Leland to check on her. He confirmed she was still at the same address, still working at the dental office, still raising Ivy alone. But she had stopped writing. Not because she stopped caring, but because there was nothing left to say that would not break one of us. That same month, Leland called with different news. The forensic accountant, he said. Conrad Hawkins. I found his connection. I was standing at the payphone in the common area. An inmate 3 phones down was arguing about visiting hours. A guard walked past carrying a clipboard. What connection? I asked. He's Preston's younger brother, Leland said. I went very still. Say that again. Conrad Hawkins is Preston's brother. I ran a deep background check. Different mothers, same father. Conrad was raised in Connecticut. Preston was raised in New Jersey. They didn't grow up together, but they knew about each other. And when Conrad graduated from NYU with an accounting degree in 2004, Preston got him a position at Vance Global. 2004, the Queen's Garage, one truck, $800 a month rent. And Preston's brother was already there waiting. He started at Vance Global in 2004. Leland continued. You were still operating out of the garage. You had, 3 employees? Or, I said, including me. Conrad was there before you had anything, Leland said. Before the expansion, before the contracts, before the company was worth stealing. Preston planted his brother inside your operation when you were still loading trucks yourself. I stood at that payphone trying to process what 20 years looked like when you mapped it backward. 2004 to 2024. 2 decades. Conrad had been there through the first major contract, the first warehouse expansion, the first year we cleared $1 million in revenue. He had watched me build the company from nothing to something, and the entire time he was reporting every detail back to Preston. Not as a hired accomplice. As family. He waited 20 years, I said. They both did, Leland said. Preston got his brother a position, and they waited for the company to be worth taking. Then they built the case, planted the evidence, positioned you for the fall. It wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a generational plan. 20 years. This plot was not 9 years. It was 20 years. Preston planted his brother when I had nothing, and they waited 2 decades for the perfect moment to take everything. Conrad's been the inside man the whole time, Leland said. Every financial decision, every expansion, every contract he knew about it first. He advised you on the structures. He helped you build the systems. And then when the time came, he testified that you ordered him to commit fraud using those exact same systems. Because he built them, I said. He built the structures he later claimed were fraudulent. Exactly. I sat on the edge of the bunk after hanging up, holding the phone receiver longer than necessary, because putting it down would mean accepting what I had just learned. This conspiracy did not start when I went to prison. It did not start when Preston moved into the mansion or when Simone filed for divorce. It started in 2004 in a garage in Queens when I was proud to have 4 employees and thought Preston was doing me a favor by bringing his brother into the company. 20 years they had been planning this, and I had spent 9 years in prison thinking I was 3 moves ahead. Understanding that the conspiracy was 20 years old instead of 9 did not change my plan. It just made me more patient. If they could wait 2 decades to steal everything, I could wait 9 years to take it back. Year 7 was when Preston stopped being careful and started being ambitious, and that was the year I knew he would lose. Leland called on a Tuesday morning in 2022. They filed incorporation changes this morning, he said. Estate restructuring. They're trying to lock inheritance before you get out. I was standing at the payphone in the common area. Year 7, 2 years left on my sentence if I got full credit for good behavior. What kind of changes, I asked. Documents filed with Manhattan Probate Court, Leland said. Will amendments, trust structures, all designed to ensure that when you're released, you have no legal claim to company assets. Everything flows to Preston and Simone. Eleonora and Remy are listed as secondary beneficiaries with conditions that make it nearly impossible for them to inherit anything. How many documents? 4 so far, filed over the past 3 weeks. 4 documents. That was enough. They don't know, I said. Don't know what? 15 years ago, when I restructured the company charter, I inserted a biometric veto clause. Any ownership transfer of more than 10% without my fingerprint-verified signature triggers automatic federal investigation. It's buried in Section 47.3 of the Charter Amendments from 2007. Preston never read that section. No one did. Leland was quiet for 5 seconds, so every document they just filed viewed as federal evidence. I finished. Evidence of attempted ownership transfer without founder consent. Evidence of forged estate documents. Evidence of conspiracy to defraud. They're building the case against themselves one filing at a time, and they don't know it. By that month, they had submitted 4 documents. All 4 were federal evidence. The beauty of it was the precision. I did not have to do anything except wait. Preston and Simone were so focused on locking down the inheritance before I got out that they were filing document after document, each one triggering the biometric veto clause, each one automatically flagged in the federal system as a potential fraud case. By the time I walked out of Terminal Island, there would be a paper trail 6 inches thick showing systematic attempts to transfer ownership of a company without the founder's consent. They're ambitious, I said. That's the problem. Careful criminals wait. Ambitious criminals make mistakes. They're making them fast, Leland said. I'll keep tracking. I hung up and went back to my cell. But 3 months later, Leland called with news that crossed a different line. They hired someone at a Boston lab, he said. Genetic testing facility. Employee's name is Silas Reed. They want fake DNA results. I sat down on the bunk. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Someone 2 cells down was arguing about commissary. Fake DNA results for what I asked, though I already knew. The goal is to prove Eleonora is not your biological daughter, Leland said. If they can get lab documentation saying she's not genetically related to you, they can disqualify her from any inheritance claim on the remaining estate assets. Silas Reed was 35 years old and worked as a lab technician at a genetic testing facility in Boston. When Preston and Simone approached him with enough money to falsify DNA results, he was afraid enough of what they might do if he refused that he said yes. Leland had been tracking him for 3 months. Silas lived in a small apartment in Somerville. He took the subway to work every morning at 6:45. He drank coffee at the same cafe every day at 7 a.m. while reading the newspaper. Habits. Everyone has them. And habits make people predictable. How much are they paying him? I asked. $40,000, Leland said. Half up front, half when he delivers the falsified results. $40,000 to erase my daughter's identity. To take a lab report that would say she was not biologically mine, to use science as a weapon, to strip her of family and inheritance. And the one thing they could not steal with forged documents, her connection to me. Can you get to him? I asked. Already working on it, Leland said. But there's something else you should know. Silas is scared. He didn't want to do this. They pressured him, threatened his job, his career. He's keeping records, emails, payment receipts, everything. He's building insurance in case they turn on him. Good. Fear makes people careful. Careful people document. Keep watching him, I said. When I get out, I want to know exactly what he has and where he keeps it. But that lab employee did not know that my detective had been tracking him for 3 months. And he had a habit of drinking coffee at 7 a.m. at the same cafe, which meant Leland knew exactly where to find him when the time came. I put down the phone and sat very still in my cell for a long time. This was the cruelest move. It was not enough to take Eleonora's job at Silicon Sky. Not enough to destroy her career and her income and her ability to help me when I got out. Not enough to force her into a 1-room apartment in East LA, raising a child alone on $2,400 a month. They wanted to take her identity. They wanted to produce a lab report official, stamped, signed by a credentialed technician, that said she was not my daughter. They wanted to use genetics to erase her from my family entirely. Not just disinherit her legally, but delegitimize her biologically. Make it so that even if she fought them in court, even if she challenged the forged wills and the stolen assets, there would be a document saying she had no standing because she was not even related to me. That crossed a line I had not known existed until they stepped over it. You can steal money. You can steal property. You can steal time and freedom and 9 years of my life. But when you try to steal someone's identity, when you try to erase their connection to their own father, you are doing something that cannot be undone with contracts or court rulings or financial restitution. You are trying to erase a person. And that was the moment I decided that when I walked out of Terminal Island in 2 years, I would not just take back what they stole. I would make sure everyone knew exactly what they had tried to do. When you cross the line from stealing assets to erasing identity, you have made a choice about what kind of person you are willing to be. Preston and Simone made that choice in year 7. By year 8, they were living with the consequences without knowing it yet. Year 8 was the year Preston stopped delegating and started using Remy's name on everything that could send someone to federal prison. Leland called in the spring of 2023. 3 contracts this month, he said. Biggest ones yet. Total value $47 million. All offshore transfers. All with Remy's signature. I was sitting on my bunk. Year 8. 1 year left. The fluorescent lights hummed the way they always did. $47 million, I repeated. But 3 separate contracts, Leland said. Each one transfers Vance Global assets to a 4th-tier offshore shell company. Cayman registration. Untraceable ownership structure. The kind of setup that exists only to hide money and evade taxes. And Remy signed all 3. She, without legal review, Leland confirmed. Preston walked him through each one, told him it was standard corporate restructuring. Remy believed him. I knew then they were planting a bomb on my son, making him the signature on every fraudulent transaction. When this collapsed, when the federal investigators came looking, they would find Remy's name on documents worth $47 million. They would find his signature authorizing transfers to shell companies designed to hide assets. They would build a conspiracy case against him while Preston stayed clean. Does Remy know what he's signing? I asked. No, Leland said. Preston told him you're a criminal who abandoned the family. Told him you're going to come after the company when you get out, try to take everything back. Remy thinks he's protecting his mother. Thinks he's securing the business against a greedy ex-convict who doesn't deserve anything. Remy believed he was protecting his family from me. That was the cruelest part. Not that they were using him as a scapegoat, but that they had convinced him he was doing something noble. But my detective hacked his phone from the first month. Every call, every message, every contract, I read them before he signed. Keep documenting, I said. I want every signature, every date, every dollar amount. Already done, Leland said. But there's something else. I recovered Preston's deleted email account. Deleted emails are never really deleted. They sit on servers backed up in systems that most people forget exist. Leland had been working with a forensic data specialist for 6 months, reconstructing Preston's communications from 2015 forward. What did you find? I asked. 23 employees, Leland said. All fired between 2016 and 2020. Every one of them was loyal to you. People who worked at Vance Global before the arrest. People who knew you who might have questioned what happened. He fired them. With fabricated causes, Leland said. Performance issues that didn't exist. Policy violations that were never documented before the termination memos. He systematically removed anyone who might have been sympathetic to you or suspicious about the takeover. 23 people. 23 careers disrupted. 23 families affected because they had the misfortune of being loyal to the wrong person. Preston had not just stolen my company. He had erased everyone who remembered it was mine. "There's one more thing," Leland said. "And this one is, I don't know how else to say it, this one is perfect." "Perfect how?" "Simone installed a surveillance camera in the mansion." I sat up straighter. "When?" "Oh, year 5, Leland said. "She got suspicious of the butler. No proof, just paranoia. She installed a hidden camera in the hallway outside the study, positioned to monitor Norwood's evening routine. She was trying to catch him." "She was," Leland said. "But the camera angle it captures his desk, the small desk where he sits every night after Preston and Simone go to bed." I understood before he finished. "The desk where he places the recording device," I said. "Every night," Leland confirmed. "Simone's camera films Norwood setting up the recording equipment, films him positioning it to capture Preston's study conversations, films him checking the device, changing batteries, downloading files. 9 years of audio recordings. And now we have video proof that every single one of them is real." She wanted to catch the butler. Instead, she handed me 9 years of evidence wrapped in a bow made of her own suspicion. "Does Norwood know about the camera?" I asked. "He discovered it in week 2, Leland said. "He's a professional. He swept for surveillance and found it immediately." "And he didn't disable it?" "No," Leland said. "He left it running. And then he deliberately positioned his recording equipment in perfect view of the camera. He's been performing for Simone's surveillance for 9 years, creating a video record of himself creating an audio record. It's the most elegant confirmation of authenticity I've ever seen." Norwood had turned Simone's paranoia into evidence. Her attempt to catch him had become documentation that his recordings were legitimate. Every night for 9 years, her camera filmed him recording Preston's conversations, creating a chain of custody that would hold up in any federal court. "She built my case," I said. "Without knowing it," Leland agreed. "She wanted to catch the butler, but she created the most perfect evidence for you without knowing it." I sat on that bunk for a long time after Leland hung up. The cell was quiet, except for the usual background noise, someone coughing 2 cells down the television, murmuring through walls the footsteps of guards on rounds. 1 year left, 12 months. Then I would walk out of Terminal Island with everything I needed to take back what they stole. Leland sent me a single frame from Simone's camera footage the next week. It showed Norwood at his small desk, the recording device visible in perfect focus timestamp, showing year 5, month 3. She wanted to catch the butler, but she created the most perfect evidence for me without knowing it. 9 years of recordings. And now video proof that every one of them was real. That camera footage sat in a secure server for 1 year while I finished my sentence. And then I walked out of Terminal Island on a November morning with $80 and the same watch that still did not work. And the first thing I did was go meet the man who had spent 9 years watching the people who destroyed me. Leland Ashford was sitting in a corner booth of the Mexican diner with his back to the wall and a folder thick enough to contain 9 years spread out on the table in front of him. The diner was 2 miles from Terminal Island. Small place. Red vinyl booths. Smell of tortillas and grilled meat and coffee that had been sitting too long. Evening streetlights coming through the window made everything look yellow and tired. 3 other customers scattered at tables, none of them paying attention to the corner booth, where a 61-year-old former detective was meeting the man he had worked for remotely since 2014. I slid into the booth across from him. Leland looked older than I expected. Gray hair. Lines around his eyes that came from squinting at surveillance photos for too many years. But his handshake was firm and his eyes were sharp, and when he looked at me I could see him cataloging details the way good investigators do posture expression. Anything that might tell him whether 9 years in federal prison had changed the man who hired him. "You look the same," he said. "I'm not," I said. He pushed a cup of coffee across the table. Black. No sugar. He had remembered from a conversation we had in year 2 about how I took my coffee. 47 pages, he said, tapping the folder. 9 years in 47 pages. Everything we discussed. Everything I tracked. Everything you asked me to document. I opened the folder. The pages were organized chronologically. Year 1 through year 9. Each year got approximately 5 pages. Financial documents, surveillance photographs, transcripts of conversations Leland had recorded using long-range audio equipment positioned outside the mansion, email intercepts, phone records. The systematic documentation of a 20-year conspiracy compressed into a dossier that could fit in a manila folder. I read through it methodically, not quickly, not scanning. Reading each page the way you read a contract when you want to find the clause that will save you or destroy you. Page 7. The 7th loan. $85 million in total debt. All with floating interest rates that had already started adjusting upward as federal benchmarks climbed. Page 12. Conrad Hawkins confirmed as Preston's younger brother through adoption records Leland obtained from Connecticut Family Court archives. Page 23. Simone's surveillance camera installation. Camera angle diagram showing perfect view of Norwood's desk and recording equipment. 9 years of video confirmation that every audio file was authentic. Page 31. Remy's contracts. $47 million in offshore transfers. All signed without legal counsel. All positioning him as the primary liability target. Page 38. Silas Reed, Boston lab employee. Genetic testing falsification. Payment records showing $20,000 upfront, $20,000 on delivery. I already knew. Not because Leland had told me over the phone, because I had built the system that produced these pages 9 years before I ever saw them. Leland watched me read. After 15 minutes, he spoke. "You already know all of this," he said. It was not a question. I looked up from page 40. Yes, I said. "You knew before I documented it." "I knew before you started working for me," I said. I found Simone's second phone in 2014, 6 months before the arrest. I read the emails between her and Preston. I understood what they were planning. And I spent those 6 months preparing. Leland leaned back in the booth. His expression did not change, but I could see him recalculating something about the man he had been working for remotely all these years. "You hired me before you went to prison," he said. 6 months before, I confirmed. "I told you to document everything. I gave you access codes to company systems. I showed you where Preston would likely hide evidence. I built the biometric veto clause into the charter. I planted the debt bomb in the original loan structures. I positioned Norwood at the mansion. Then I went to prison and waited for them to incriminate themselves." "You let them frame you," Leland said. "I let them think they framed me," I corrected. "There's a difference. If I had fought the arrest, if I had challenged the evidence, they would have known I was 3 moves ahead. They would have been careful. But if I went quietly, if I accepted the prison sentence without a fight, they would get ambitious. And ambitious criminals make mistakes." Leland looked at the folder spread across the table. 47 pages documenting exactly that 9 years of mistakes made by people who thought they had already won. "So the question was never whether you had evidence," he said. "The question was whether you were willing to spend 9 years in prison to get it." "Yes," I said. He was quiet for a long moment. "Then here's the new part," he said, flipping to page 47. "The part you don't know yet because it happened in the past 3 months while you were finishing your sentence." I looked at the page. 2 names, 2 addresses, 2 phone numbers. Silas Reed, Boston lab employee, Conrad Hawkins. Senior forensic accountant. Chapike, Boston lab employee wants to meet, Leland said. He's scared. Thinks Preston will eliminate him once the DNA fraud is complete. He has documentation, payment records, email instructions, the real DNA results, alongside the fake ones he was told to produce. He's been trying to reach me for 6 weeks. I nodded. That was useful. A scared accomplice with documentation was the best kind of witness. And the other one, I asked. Leland slid the folder across the table toward me and leaned back. Shokto, Preston's younger brother, he said. Conrad. He wants to talk. He's been looking for me for 3 months. Says he can't do it anymore. Says he's been carrying something for 20 years, and it's destroying him. I looked at Conrad's name on the page. The man who sat in a federal conference room in 2015 and lied with a face like carved stone. The man who testified that I personally ordered fraud. The man who was Preston's brother planted at my company when I had nothing worth stealing. He wanted to talk. Did he say what he wants to confess? I asked. Everything, Leland said. Conrad wanting to confess was useful. A guilty accountant with documentation was exactly the kind of witness federal prosecutors built cases on. But Leland was still looking at me like he was trying to solve a puzzle that had one piece missing. Leland was quiet for a long moment, looking at me across 2 cups of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. And then he asked the question I had been waiting 9 years for someone to ask. Why didn't you react when the IRS showed up in 2015, he said. I did not answer immediately. I read the arrest report, he continued. The way you sat there in that conference room listening to Conrad testify. The way you let your lawyer tell you to prepare for the worst without fighting back. You didn't seem surprised. You didn't seem angry. You just sat there. The diner was empty now except for us, and one waitress wiping down tables at the far end. It was past 10 o'clock. The kitchen smells had faded. All that was left was the scent of old coffee and cleaning solution. Did you know what was about to happen? Leland asked. I looked at him for a long time. 61 years old. Former NYPD detective. 23 years of service. A man who had spent 9 years working for someone he had never met in person until tonight. A man who deserved to know the truth about what he had really been documenting all these years. In 2014, I said I found Simone's second phone. Leland went very still. How it was hidden in the bathroom cabinet, I continued. Behind the spare towels on the top shelf, one of those cheap prepaid phones you buy at convenience stores. I found it on a Tuesday afternoon. She had left it there, charging thought I was at the office. I was home early because a meeting got canceled. What was on it? Leland asked. 6 months of text messages, I said. Between her and Preston, I read all of them. Every conversation, every plan, every detail. 2014. 18 months before they arrested me. I knew. The affair, I said. Conrad's role as Preston's brother. The plan to fabricate evidence and frame me for fraud. The timeline they wanted to move fast, get me arrested within a year, take the company while I was fighting criminal charges from inside a cell. All of it was there. Text messages going back 6 months. And you didn't stop it, Leland said. No, I said. I started preparing. I told him about the 6 months between finding that phone and the morning the IRS came. 6 months of very careful, very quiet preparation. I inserted the biometric veto clause into the company charter in August 2014. Buried it in Section 47.3 of a routine amendment filing that Preston never read past page 3. Any ownership transfer without my fingerprint signature would trigger federal review. I modified the original debt structure in September 2014. Took the loan terms I had set up in 1999 and added the floating interest rate clauses, tied them to federal benchmarks, made it so that every new loan Preston signed would adjust the rate on every previous loan, built the debt bomb that would take 20 years to detonate. I hired Leland in October 2014, 6 months before the arrest, not after. I gave him access codes to company systems. I told him exactly what to watch for. I showed him where Preston would likely hide evidence because I had read Simone's texts and knew their strategy. And in November 2014, I planted Norwood at the mansion, hired him as household staff, gave him one instruction: stay invisible and document everything. And you knew they were going to frame you, Leland said. And you let it happen. I let it perfect itself, I said. If I had confronted Simone in 2014, if I had exposed the affair or fired Conrad or challenged Preston, they would have known I was 3 moves ahead. They would have been careful. They would have covered their tracks. They would have built a cleaner conspiracy, one I could not dismantle. So you went to prison, Leland said. So I let them think they had won, I said. When the IRS came in March 2015, when Conrad sat across from me and lied with perfect composure, I already knew what he was going to say. I had read the emails. I had seen the fabricated evidence. I knew every piece of the frame they were building, and you didn't fight it. Was that I fought it exactly enough to look innocent and not enough to win, I said. Because winning in 2015 would have meant exposing their plan before they had fully committed to it. I needed them to take everything. I needed them to get ambitious. I needed them to make so many mistakes over so many years that when I finally walked out of Terminal Island, the evidence against them would be overwhelming. What is 9 years in a cell when you know exactly what you're building on the outside? Well, you used the time, Leland said slowly. See, I used it to let them destroy themselves, I said. Every loan Preston signed, every forged will, every offshore contract Remy put his name on, every surveillance camera Simone installed to catch Norwood, every piece of evidence you documented for 9 years, all of it happened because they thought I was neutralized, because they thought I was in prison, powerless and broken, and no longer a threat. But you were never powerless, Leland said. I was patient, I said. There is a difference. Leland stared at me for a very long time. I could see him reframing 9 years of surveillance work, reframing every phone call we had, reframing the man he thought he was working for, a victim seeking revenge, into what I actually was. Someone who had seen the trap coming and walked into it anyway because he knew how to turn imprisonment into a weapon. Was your imprisonment intentional? He asked. I thought about that. About Simone's phone and the 6 months I spent preparing, and the moment the IRS walked into my office and I let it happen. About the choice to fight or to wait. About whether you can plan for something and still be its victim. Not entirely, I said, but when it came, I was ready. The apartment building on East 4th Street looked nothing like the penthouse Eleonora grew up in. Cracked stucco, rusted fire escape, a buzzer system where half the labels were peeling off. I stood at the entrance on my 3rd morning of freedom, holding a bouquet of sunflowers I'd bought from a bodega 2 blocks away. She'd loved sunflowers when she was 7. I pressed the button for 3C. Hello. Her voice crackled through the speaker. It's me. Silence. Then the buzz of the door unlocking. 3 flights of stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. 9 years. She'd been 26 when they arrested me. Now she was 35. I'd missed everything. Birthdays, holidays, the everyday moments that make up a life. The door to 3C opened before I could knock. Eleonora stood there in jeans and a faded Columbia sweatshirt. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, pulled back in a practical ponytail. No makeup. Dark circles under her eyes. She looked tired. She looked beautiful. Dad, I held out the sunflowers like an idiot. She took them, set them on the entry table, and wrapped her arms around me. I felt her shoulders shake. 9 years of prison visits behind bulletproof glass, and this was the first time I'd actually held my daughter since 2015. We stood there in her doorway for a long time. The apartment was small, but clean. 1 bedroom, judging by the layout. A kitchenette with a 2-person table. A couch that had seen better days. Children's drawings taped to the refrigerator. A shelf of law books she'd been studying for the bar when I went to prison. But Silicon Sky had hired her for corporate compliance instead. She saw me looking at the books. I finished the degree, she said quietly. Took night classes. Passed the bar last year. Ellie, I know what you're thinking. This place, after everything we had. She moved to the kitchenette, filled a kettle with water. I could have asked Uncle Preston for money. He offered. Multiple times. I said nothing. "Too?" she asked. "Please." We sat at her kitchen table. 2 mismatched chairs. A table that wobbled slightly. Through the thin wall, I could hear a child's voice from the next room, cartoons, maybe homework videos. Eleonora wrapped her hands around her mug and started talking. She told me everything the prison letters hadn't. How Silicon Sky's general counsel called her into his office 3 weeks after my arrest and said the company couldn't employ family members of individuals under federal investigation. How her fiancé, Marcus, an investment banker she'd been with for 2 years, broke off the engagement 6 months later because his firm's partners thought the association was problematic. How she'd found out she was pregnant 2 weeks after the breakup. "I didn't tell you about Ivy in the letters," she said, "because I didn't want you carrying that. The guilt. The weight of knowing your granddaughter was being born while you were in prison." I reached across the table. She took my hand. "I read every letter you sent," I said, 100 times each. "I know. That's why I stopped writing details after the first 2 years. She looked at me with those sharp eyes, my eyes. "Because I figured it out, Dad." First twist. Figured what out? That you had a plan. She pulled her hand back, crossed her arms. "Year 1, I thought you were destroyed. Year 2, I thought you were surviving. But then, in year 3, you sent me that birthday card, you remember." I remembered. I'd written, "Stay patient. Gardens grow in silence." That's when I knew, Eleonora continued. You weren't broken. You were waiting, building something. She stood paced to the window overlooking the street. "So I stopped writing about my life because I didn't want to distract you. I kept the letters short, generic, safe. Because whatever you were doing, I trusted you." My daughter had inherited more than my eyes. "I found Simone's phone," I said. December 2014. Hidden in the guest bathroom cabinet. Read 6 months of text messages between her and Preston. Saw everything. Eleonora nodded slowly. "And you didn't confront them." "I had 6 months before they pulled the trigger. I used every day." "The biometric veto clauses." "Yes." "The debt structure." "Yes." "Leland." I smiled. "Leland." She turned from the window. "How much of this did you anticipate?" "Not the arrest itself. But I knew something was coming. I knew it would be catastrophic. So I built insurance policies into everything." I set down my mug. I also knew that the best way to completely destroy someone isn't to stop them. It's to let them think they've won, let them build their empire on a foundation you control, and then pull the foundation out from under them. Eleonora smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "They have no idea what's coming. They know something's coming, but they don't know what, or when, or how." We talked for 3 hours. About Ivy, brilliant, curious, obsessed with science videos. About Remy, I told her the DNA truth, watched her process it, with the same analytical calm she'd always had. About the Plaza Hotel confrontation Leland was arranging. About Conrad's wavering loyalty and Belinda Fitzgerald's forensic accounting. About the moment in 2 days when 9 years of preparation would culminate in a single afternoon. "I want to be there," Eleonora said. "At the Plaza." "No, Dad, you've already lost 9 years to this. I won't let you lose anything else." I stood. When it's over, when they're in handcuffs, when Whitfield Logistics has your name on the door instead of theirs, then you'll be part of it. But the confrontation itself, that's mine. She didn't argue. She understood. I moved toward the door. Stopped. "Ellie, I need to ask you something." "What does Ivy know about me?" Eleonora's expression shifted something between hope and fear. "She knows her grandfather is a good man who was wrongly accused. She knows you're out now. She knows you built something important." She paused. "Dad, do you want to see Ivy?" From the next room, the sound of pencil scratching paper stopped completely. Second twist. In the sudden silence, I realized someone very small had been listening to every word. The small footsteps emerged from Ivy's room before I could answer Eleonora's question. A child appeared in the kitchen doorway. 7 years old, I'd missed her 6th birthday while I was inside. She held a stuffed unicorn under one arm, purple with a silver horn. She stood completely still for 3 seconds, studying my face with an intensity I recognized. The same analytical stare I'd once used across boardroom tables measuring whether someone could be trusted. Her silence felt deliberate. She was deciding something. Ivy, sweetheart," Eleonora said softly. This is Grandpa Desmond." Ivy's eyes never left mine. "You look different than in the pictures," she said finally. "I suppose 9 years will do that." She nodded once, as if confirming a hypothesis. Then she set her unicorn carefully on the kitchen counter, turned, and walked back to her bedroom without another word. Eleonora started to stand. I raised my hand. "She's been through so much at the mansion, Dad," Eleonora whispered. "She needs time." "She's smarter than all of them," I said. "I can see it." From the next room came the sound of a toy box opening. Items shifting, plastic clicking against plastic. I waited, hands folded on the scarred kitchen table, listening to my granddaughter make whatever decision she was making. Footsteps again, slower this time. Ivy walked back into the kitchen, holding something small in her closed fist. She approached the table with the same ceremonial precision I'd seen federal prosecutors use when presenting evidence. She stopped beside my chair, opened her hand, and placed a child's smartwatch on the worn wood surface. Pink silicone band. Cracked screen. Cartoon characters on the display. "Grandpa," she said, "I kept this for you." I picked up the watch carefully. "What is this, sweetheart?" I hid it in my toy box. Mommy and Uncle Preston didn't know I had it. Eleonora leaned forward, staring at the device. "Ivy, is that the watch from your 5th birthday? I thought you lost it." "I didn't lose it." Ivy's voice carried no defensiveness, just fact. "I stopped wearing it when Mommy started yelling at Uncle Preston about the money. I hid it in my unicorn's carrying case because it still recorded sounds." The watch face showed a cartoon unicorn matching her stuffed toy, a child's device turned surveillance tool by a kindergartner who understood betrayal before she could spell the word. My hands started shaking. "Sometimes I turned it on when they talked in the big room." Ivy continued, matter of fact. I thought maybe you'd want to hear what they said." Eleonora breathed. "You recorded them." Ivy looked at her mother with those sharp, measuring eyes. "Grandpa wasn't there to hear it. Someone had to remember." First twist. This child, 6 years old when she'd done this, 5 when she'd started, had understood something fundamental that most adults never grasped. Evidence disappears unless someone preserves it. Truth gets buried unless someone remembers. I pressed the button on the watch's side. The screen flickered to life, 12% battery remaining. I navigated the child-friendly interface cartoon icons' bright colors until I found the audio files folder. 47 recordings, some 3 minutes long, others just seconds. Dates spanning from February 2024 to October 2024. 8 months of a child secretly documenting the adults who destroyed her family. 47 recordings, I whispered. Ivy nodded. I didn't understand all the words, but I knew they were bad words about you. Eleonora wrapped her arm around Ivy, pulling her daughter close. I saw tears on my daughter's face, pride mixed with heartbreak. The child who'd survived an emotional war zone by becoming a witness. The child who'd understood at 5 years old that truth needed to be preserved, even when the adults around her were trying to bury it. Second twist. 47 pieces of evidence I'd never known existed. 47 windows into the conspiracy, recorded in real time, preserved in a pink toy watch, hidden in a unicorn's carrying case. Before I press play on that recording, before I hear what a 6-year-old preserved in a toy box, are you still with me? Comment A if you think this holds up as legal evidence, or B if it won't. Add one short reason. Please note the dialogue that follows is recreated for storytelling, though the truth behind it remains. I scrolled through the files looking for something recent. Found one dated April 14th, 2024. 6 months before my release. The timestamp read 8:47 p.m. I looked at Ivy. May I play this one, sweetheart? She nodded. I pressed play. The watch speaker crackled with compressed audio quality, but the voices were unmistakable. My wife and my son planning my destruction in the house I built, recorded by the granddaughter I'd never met. Static hiss. Then Simone's voice, sharp and impatient. We have to be done before he comes out. Preston's response, cold and calculated. He won't be able to do anything. He has nothing left. A third voice, Remy Wexford, the attorney I'd trusted to handle Whitfield Logistics' corporate restructuring. The debt structure is airtight, Remy said. Even if he tries to challenge the bankruptcy, he'll be buried in legal fees within 6 months. Simone again. If he contacts anyone from the old business, Remy will make sure they know he's toxic. No one will take his calls. Preston laughed. I'd never heard that sound from him before, cruel and satisfied, nothing like the son I'd raised. And then a fourth voice entered the recording. One I hadn't expected to hear. One that changed the entire landscape of what I thought I knew. Conrad Harrington, my former CFO. The man who'd sent me the blue envelope with Leland's contact information. The man I'd thought was my last remaining ally. His voice came through the tiny speaker, quiet but clear, saying just 4 words that rewrote everything. The plaza is confirmed. The 4 words Conrad spoke on the recording were, "When does Desmond get out?" I rewound Ivy's smartwatch 3 times to make sure. April 2024, 6 months before my release. Conrad's voice entering a conversation between Simone Preston and Remy, but his tone wasn't collaborative. It was anxious. A man counting down to something. Simone's voice sharp with suspicion. November, why? Conrad careful. Just planning ahead. Preston cold and assessing. You getting cold feet, Conrad. Silence on the recording. Then Conrad. The plaza is confirmed. Not a confession of conspiracy. A statement of preparation. Conrad wasn't helping them. He was tracking me, confirming details, building toward something I didn't yet understand. I spent 5 days listening to all 47 recordings, cross-referencing names, dollar amounts, dates. I filled 3 yellow legal pads with notes, timelines branching across pages like circuit diagrams. Eleonora brought me coffee every morning, asked no questions, gave me space to work. On day 6, Silas arrived at the apartment with a laptop under his arm. "It's clean," he said, setting it on the kitchen table. "Encrypted messaging software already installed. Use the handle Greentree. Someone might reach out." He left without asking what I was doing. Some friendships are built on trust that doesn't require explanation. Day 8. Thursday morning. The notification woke me at 6:47 a.m. Username LadyJustice47. Message, Mr. Whitfield. I tried to stop them in 2011. They were stronger then. I believe you have what I've been waiting 14 years to see. Are you ready? I sat up in the dark apartment laptop screen, the only light. Read the message 3 times. Another message appeared. Federal resources available if evidence is substantial. No immunity, no deals, just justice. Reply only if recordings verify conspiracy to defraud and obstruct. I typed 47 recordings. My granddaughter made them. How do I know you're real? 30 seconds. Then, Belinda Fitzgerald, former assistant U.S. Attorney, Eastern District, NY. Case number 2011-CR-8847. Preston Leland Whitfield forced my resignation when I got too close. I've waited long enough. First twist. A federal prosecutor pushed out 13 years ago for investigating the same people who destroyed me. Another casualty of Preston's reach. Another person waiting for the moment when the evidence would finally be strong enough. 14 years. Belinda Fitzgerald waited 14 years for this moment, her career destroyed by the same people who destroyed mine. That afternoon, I went to the public library, used their computers to search her name. Former Assistant U.S. Attorney, Eastern District of New York, resignation, 2011. Her resignation letter was public record preserved in legal databases. I cannot in good conscience continue when political pressure overrides prosecutorial duty. Now she practiced privately, specializing in white-collar fraud. Her firm's website showed a woman in her early 50s, steel gray hair, sharp eyes, that had seen too many guilty people walk free. A second encrypted message arrived that evening. Conrad Hawkins wants to meet. Brooklyn address attached. He says he was there from the beginning. The coffee shop was nearly empty at 7:15 Thursday morning. November light cut through tall windows, casting long shadows across worn wooden tables. I chose a seat near the back wall facing the door. Old habits from Terminal Island: never sit with your back exposed. Conrad Hawkins arrived at 7:18. 52 years old, gray at the temples, wearing an expensive suit that no longer fit quite right. He'd lost weight. Or perhaps guilt had worn him down to a smaller version of himself. He carried a closed laptop and a coffee that had gone cold. When he saw me, his expression shifted from dread to something like relief. "You look..." He set the laptop on the table. "You look like you survived. You were my CFO for 11 years, I said quietly. "You signed the audit reports. You sat across from federal investigators and told them the Port of Oakland error was my decision. I know what I did." Conrad sat down heavily. "That's why I'm here." He talked for 90 minutes. He was planted in 2004, brought in through the Queens Garage acquisition I'd made to expand East Coast operations. His job was to create the financial architecture that would let Preston and the consortium extract value while building the appearance of fraud around me. He kept duplicate files of every altered document, every falsified report, every email that showed the real decision-makers. "I thought I could do it," Conrad said, staring at his cold coffee. "Take the money, play the role, sleep at night. Then you went to Terminal Island. And you felt guilty." I stopped sleeping. 9 years, Desmond. I haven't had a full night's sleep in 9 years. Second twist. The man I'd trusted to manage Whitfield Logistics finances had been a plant from the beginning, but he'd kept insurance. Evidence preserved against the day he knew would come, when his conspirators would turn on him the way they'd turned on me. Conrad opened the laptop. Folders organized by year 2004 through 2015. Original contracts, unaltered invoices, emails with metadata intact wire transfer records showing where money actually went. Everything Preston's legal team had claimed didn't exist. Conrad's laptop contained the original blueprints to the mansion built on my grave. Every nail, every beam, every lie precisely documented by the architect forced to build it. I kept them because I knew how this worked, Conrad said. Preston never wanted partners. He wanted possessions, people he could use and discard. You were protecting yourself. I was protecting evidence. I just didn't know who to give it to until Belinda found me 2 weeks ago. He scrolled through folders, hundreds of files, thousands of pages. A complete record of 11 years of systematic fraud preserved by the man who'd helped execute it. Conrad looked out the window at the Brooklyn street. Morning commuters passed oblivious to the conversation, ending 20 years of silence. His fingers rested on the laptop lid. I have all the original documents. Everything. He turned back to me. Because I never believed my brother wouldn't sacrifice me someday. I went completely still. Conrad's brother. The name he hadn't spoken in 90 minutes of confession. Who is your brother, Conrad? He closed the laptop with careful finality. His hands rested on the lid for 3 seconds before he answered. Marcus Ashford, my older brother. He brought me into this. First twist, the investment banker who'd structured the Queen's Garage acquisition in 2004. The man whose leveraged buyout proposal had seemed so brilliant at the time, so perfectly designed to expand Whitfield Logistics into East Coast markets. The man who'd recommended Conrad Hawkins as the ideal CFO to manage the new operational complexity. The banker who structured the leveraged buyout, Conrad nodded. He promised me equity, partnership stake after you were removed. I got a salary and insomnia. 20 years of being his inside man, documenting everything he needed. Documented, altering everything he needed altered. And when it was done, when you were in Terminal Island and the company was restructured, he kept me on salary. No equity, no partnership. Just the same title and the knowledge of what I'd done. So you kept the files. I kept everything because I knew how this worked. Marcus never wanted partners. He wanted assets he could leverage and discard. 2 days later, I stood in a Boston coffee shop 3 blocks from the laboratory where Silas had worked for 14 years. December cold had settled over the city gray sky, pressing down like a lid. Silas sat at a corner table looking 10 years older than his 43 years. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. I sat across from him. You said you had something that could end this. He slid a manila envelope across the table. His hands shook. Inside were 2 laboratory reports, same case number, different results. I read them both twice. The first report, submitted to Manhattan Family Court in February 2015, showed Eleonora was not my biological daughter. Chain of custody documented. Laboratory certification official. Results unambiguous. The second report, never submitted, proved she was. They paid me $40,000 to submit the fake results, Silas said quietly. I kept the real ones in my desk drawer for 9 years. Couldn't throw them away. Couldn't turn them in. Just kept them. Why now? Because you're out. And because I can't do this anymore. He pulled a second envelope from his messenger bag. Bank statements, emails, payment receipts. The conspiracy reached me through Marcus Ashford in January 2015. They needed DNA evidence to support the divorce proceedings against you. The fake result helped justify custody restrictions, property division, your complete legal isolation. I told myself it was just paperwork, just numbers on a page. But I went to prison. And Eleonora believed she wasn't yours. Silas's voice broke. I destroyed a father-daughter relationship for $40,000 and 9 years of nightmares. That night, Belinda Fitzgerald's temporary office near Federal Plaza. The conference room was small, fluorescent lit, deliberately unmarked. Belinda sat at the head of the table. Conrad to her right, Silas to her left. An FBI agent in civilian clothes, jeans, university sweatshirt. Nothing to indicate federal authority stood near the window. I took the seat facing the door. The conference table held 9 years of evidence spread across its surface like puzzle pieces that had been scattered across state lines, hidden in toy boxes and desk drawers, and encrypted servers now assembled into a single devastating picture. Norwood's butler recordings 83 hours of mansion conversations. Ivy's 47 smartwatch files. Conrad's duplicate financial documents spanning 2004 to 2015. Silas's DNA proof. The forged wills. Hacked emails with metadata intact. Bank transfers showing money flowing through shell corporations to the actual beneficiaries. The FBI agent photographed each piece with a high-resolution camera, building the official record. "This is sufficient for RICO charges," he said, voice flat and procedural. Fraud, conspiracy to defraud, obstruction of justice, forgery, perjury, witness tampering. Belinda leaned back in her chair. "We need them in one location. Documented. On record. Somewhere they can't deny attendance or claim ignorance. The Plaza Gala," I said. "Vance Global's 9th anniversary celebration. 3 days from now. January 14th. Conrad looked up sharply. "Preston's hosting it. 200 guests. Press. Board members." "Exactly. Public enough that refusing to attend would raise questions. Private enough that we control who hears what." The FBI agent nodded. "We can position personnel, civilian clothes, recording equipment. If they make admissions on site, we have grounds for immediate arrest." Belinda began organizing the evidence by timeline. 2004 Queens Garage acquisition, Conrad planted as CFO. 2011 Belinda's forced resignation when her investigation got too close. 2015 Silas's fake DNA results, divorce proceedings, IRS raid. 2016 my incarceration. 2024 Ivy's recordings capturing real-time conspiracy discussions. 2024 Conrad's archive revealing 20 years of systematic fraud. 20 years, Belinda said softly. They ran this for 20 years. And they never expected the people they used to keep evidence, I said. Day 12, post-release. One day before the gala. I sat in the temporary apartment's kitchen with the burner phone Silas had given me, staring at the number I'd written on a scrap of paper. Preston's office line. I dialed. 4 rings. Then his voice, careful and measured. "Preston Whitfield, it's me." Silence. I heard his breathing pattern shift. Surprise he couldn't quite control. "Dad, I didn't expect to hear from you." Second twist. I kept my voice humble, measured, carrying just the right amount of tentative hope. "I want to attend the gala tomorrow. Vance Global's 9th anniversary. I built that company. I should be there to see what it's become." Another pause. I could almost hear him calculating, weighing variables, trying to determine if this was genuine or trap. "Of course," he said finally, warmth entering his voice like sunlight through storm clouds. "Yes, you're always welcome, Dad." Preston called me Dad twice in 3 minutes, a word I hadn't heard from him in over a decade now, deployed as camouflage for whatever counter-trap he thought he was setting. "Do you need anything?" he continued. "I can send a car. Or if you need somewhere to stay tonight." "No car necessary. I'll see you tomorrow, son." "Tomorrow, yes." Looking forward to it, Dad. I ended the call, quickly didn't give him time to reconsider or probe deeper. Set the phone on the worn kitchen counter. My phone buzzed. Belinda, who'd been listening on speaker from her office, he took the bait. I typed my response. He will come because he has no choice. Not showing up would be admission of fear. And he has never been afraid of me. That's his biggest mistake. The Plaza Gala was 28 hours away. Preston signed the will filing paperwork at 9:17 a.m., 23 hours, before he learned it was the signature that ended everything. Manhattan Probate Courthouse, 4th floor. Winter light cut through tall windows as Preston Whitfield stood beside his attorney at the filing counter. The document in front of him was the 4th version of my will, this one dated March 2014, disinheriting Eleonora, completely consolidating all assets and control under Preston's management structure. The court clerk stamped the filing at precisely 9:17 a.m. official, entered into public record. Preston's attorney, a sharp-faced man in his 60s, closed his briefcase with quiet satisfaction. This makes 4 different wills on file. If anyone challenges the estate structure, it creates permanent legal ambiguity. That's the point, Preston said. Ambiguity is control. What Preston didn't know, Belinda Fitzgerald had filed an ultimate veto clause motion 3 days earlier, sealed by federal judge's order. The mechanism was elegant in its simplicity. The moment a 4th will appeared in probate records, any 4th will regardless of content. Automatic discovery would trigger. First twist. All 4 wills would become federal evidence. All parties named in any version would receive subpoenas. All assets referenced in any document would freeze pending fraud investigation. The legal equivalent of a biometric veto, except this one couldn't be bypassed with forged fingerprints. At 9:17 a.m., Preston's signature activated a trap built from his own greed. The probate system's automated notification protocols sent alerts to the federal monitoring system Belinda had embedded in the filing structure. Within 90 seconds, every will Preston had filed over 9 years, 2015, 2017, 2022, and now 2025, was flagged for federal review. Asset freeze would execute at 5:00 p.m. FBI tactical team would position at the Plaza Hotel at 9 p.m. Arrest warrants already prepared would activate at 9:30 p.m. My burner phone vibrated at 9:19 a.m. I sat in the temporary apartment's kitchen, coffee grown cold, watching morning traffic through the window. Belinda's text. He filed. All 4 wills now federal evidence. Asset freeze in effect 5 p.m. FBI moves at 9:30 p.m. Plaza, your choice before or after you speak. I typed one word, after. I needed them to hear it first. All of them. 300 witnesses watching Preston realized that everything he'd built was constructed on stolen ground, held together with forged signatures maintained through systematic fraud that a 6-year-old had recorded in a toy watch. Eleonora arrived at noon with a garment bag over her shoulder. I kept it because I knew you'd need it again, she said, unzipping the bag. My suit from 2015. The one I'd worn to the final board meeting before the arrest. She'd had it cleaned, preserved in cedar and careful storage. Navy blue, subtle pinstripe Italian wool that still held its shape despite 9 years in a closet. I tried on the jacket. It fit, though looser at the shoulders. Terminal Island had carved 15 pounds from my frame that I hadn't regained, but the cut still carried the shape of the man who'd built a company worth $150 million before his children tried to inherit it early. It's perfect, I said. Eleonora adjusted the collar with the same precision she'd used as a child, straightening my tie before investor meetings. Dad, are you sure about tonight? I've never been more sure of anything. She kissed my cheek, left without another word. Some moments don't need elaboration. At 7 p.m., I took a yellow cab through Manhattan evening traffic. The city scrolled past streets I'd walked as CEO buildings my company had handled logistics for intersections, where I'd closed deals worth millions. Everything familiar. Everything changed. The cabbie caught my eye in the rearview mirror. Big event at the plaza tonight. Some logistics company anniversary. Yes, I said, I know. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? 9 years erases a public face. Success has a short memory. 7:15 p.m. The plaza's Fifth Avenue entrance glowed with event lighting. Red carpet stretched from curb to door. Photographers positioned on either side captured guests in formal wear ascending the steps. Board members, investors, Manhattan Society attending Vance Global's 9th anniversary celebration. I paid the cab fare, stepped onto the sidewalk. No limousine, no entourage. Just a man in a 9-year-old suit walking toward the brass-handled door where a young attendant in formal plaza uniform stood ready. "Good evening, sir," he said, holding the door. "Welcome to the plaza." I nodded my thanks and entered. The grand ballroom at 7:18 p.m. Crystal chandeliers threw light across 300 guests gathered beneath vaulted ceilings. Champagne conversation, the orchestrated elegance of corporate celebration. I took a glass of wine someone handed me near the entrance, didn't drink it, just held it, the prop of belonging. The recognition started near the doorway. A woman in emerald silk turned, looked at me, looked away, then looked back with sharper focus. She touched her companion's arm, whispered something. He turned. The awareness spread like concentric circles through water. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned. Someone near the north wall dropped a champagne flute that landed on carpet without breaking. 300 people. One dropped glass. Total silence. Preston stood on the low stage at the ballroom's north end, mid-conversation, with 3 board members. Someone touched his arm, a woman in her 50s, board treasurer, and pointed toward the entrance. Preston turned, looked across 300 people, saw me standing near the doorway with wine I wasn't drinking. Simone stood beside Preston in a red gown that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She froze champagne halfway to her lips. Remy Wexford near the stage steps in a tuxedo that fit like armor, went completely pale. A board member whispered loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "Is that Desmond Whitfield?" Preston's voice quiet but carrying in the silence, yes. He descended from the stage, started crossing the ballroom toward me. The crowd parted without anyone consciously deciding to move. Automatic deference to confrontation, the human instinct, to clear space for conflict. I didn't move, didn't approach, just waited with the calm of someone who owned the room despite owning nothing, who'd spent 9 years in federal prison and emerged with more power than the man who'd put him there. Preston stopped 10 feet away. We stood there, father and son, separated by a decade of betrayal and a ballroom full of witnesses. I turned to face him fully. Let the silence extend another 3 seconds. Then asked, voice soft enough that only the nearest guests could hear, "What year did you build this?" Preston's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The silence of a man who has never had to answer for what he built on someone else's foundation. 300 people watched him try to form words that wouldn't come. His jaw worked like he was chewing through possible responses, testing each one in his mind before discarding it. Behind him on the stage platform, Simone gripped the podium edge hard enough that her knuckles went white. Remy Wexford moved backward toward the ballroom wall, face pale with the recognition that something irreversible was happening. Preston tried again. "Dad, we should talk privately." "No," I said, voice carrying in the absolute silence. "I think everyone here deserves to know the answer." I walked past my son, up the 3 steps to the stage platform. I moved with the calm of a man who'd spent 9 years preparing for 5 minutes. The microphone stood in its stand at center stage. I took it, felt the weight of it turn to face 300 witnesses. The ballroom was completely silent, except for my footsteps and the ambient hum of crystal chandeliers. I want to thank everyone for celebrating the 9th anniversary of Vance Global I Began. The company I built from a single warehouse in Queens in 1999. 25 years of growth, partnerships, challenges overcome. Pauses for effect aren't dramatic flourishes, they're tactical weapons. I let 5 seconds pass. Before tonight ends, you should know the truth. DNA analysis from 2 independent laboratories confirms that family relationships at the center of this company were falsified for inheritance manipulation. I looked directly at Remy Wexford standing against the far wall. Remy Wexford is not my son. He was told he was. Documents were forged to create legal confusion and control, but the science is clear. The biological relationship used to justify corporate restructuring never existed. First twist. Remy stood frozen for 3 seconds. He'd known the truth for 1 month. Belinda had shown him the real DNA results to break his loyalty. But hearing it announced to 300 people triggered something primal. He crossed the ballroom in 8 strides, grabbed Preston by the collar, yanked him around. "Well, you told me I was his son," Remy screamed, face inches from Preston's. "You used that lie for 20 years. Preston struggled against the grip. "Remy not here. Where then?" Remy's voice broke with rage. "You made me complicit in destroying a man who was never even my father. I signed documents. I testified. I helped isolate Eleonora." "For what?" Security personnel in plaza uniforms moved toward the confrontation. Simone backed away from the stage, red gown catching light as she retreated toward the north exit. 90 seconds of chaos, Remy shouting, Preston trying to escape the grip, guests pulling out phones. Journalists recording the controlled elegance of corporate celebration, fracturing into public spectacle. 90 seconds. That's how long it took for 20 years of conspiracy to become 300 witnesses. Then the ballroom lights cut completely dark. 10 seconds of total darkness. Confused murmurs. Someone screamed. Security personnel shouting to remain calm. The massive screen behind the stage illuminated, bathing the ballroom in blue-white glow. A voice came through the speaker system, cultured British accent, calm and precise. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Whitfield family, I present 9 years of mansion recordings." Second twist. Norwood Saxon. The butler who'd served the mansion throughout my imprisonment had positioned himself in the plaza's AV control room. The man I'd hired through Leland in 2015, placed in my own home to document everything my family did while I was in Terminal Island. "Everything you are about to hear and see," Norwood continued over the speakers, "was documented in real time from 2016 through 2024. The screen showed a date, February 2019. Timestamp 11:47 p.m. Location Whitfield Mansion Private Study. Preston's voice filled the ballroom crystal clear. "We need to move another $47 million before the audit window closes. Split it across the Cayman accounts. Remy has the transfer authorization." The screen shifted. April 2022. Simone's voice. "If he contacts Eleonora after release, Remy will intercept. She won't take his calls if she believes the DNA results." Another shift. January 2024. A voice I recognized as Marcus Ashford. "The fourth will should be filed the morning of the gala. Maximum confusion, minimum time to respond." Emails flashed on screen. Dollar amounts in bold: $47 million, $85 million, $163 million. Wire transfer confirmations. Shell Corporation names. Dates spanning 9 years. Conversations about timing everything before my release. Instructions on maintaining the fraud. Preston coordinating with Simone. Simone coordinating with Remy. Marcus Ashford giving orders to Conrad. A complete conspiracy documented in real time by people who never suspected the butler was recording every word. The Plaza Grand Ballroom, where robber barons once celebrated empires built on steel and oil, now held 300 people watching a digital empire disintegrate in real time. The recordings played for 2 minutes. Preston's voice. Simone's laugh when someone asked if I'd cause problems post-release. Remy discussing legal strategies to bury me in bankruptcy proceedings. Marcus Ashford confirming the Plaza Gala as the final consolidation point. Then silence. The screen faded to black. Ballroom lights came back up, slowly revealing the scene: Preston standing disheveled where Remy had released him, Simone frozen halfway to the exit. Remy against the wall with his head in his hands, 300 witnesses holding phones that had captured everything. I still held the microphone on stage. I'd stayed in the exact position where I stood when the lights went out, as if I'd never moved. As if I'd known precisely what was coming and how long it would take. I waited for complete silence. Got it. Then spoke the line that journalists would quote for years. 9 years. He had 9 years. I had 9 years. We used that time in very different ways. The ballroom stayed silent for 8 seconds. Then, movement at the far entrance. FBI agents in dark suits walked through the doors, badges visible on their belts, moving with the calm of people who had waited years for this exact moment. Belinda Fitzgerald entered behind them, carrying a legal folder that everyone in the room understood contained federal arrest warrants. The crowd parted without being asked, creating a corridor from the entrance to the stage where Preston and Simone still stood frozen. 6 FBI agents crossed the grand ballroom threshold at 9:05 p.m., moving in formation with practiced calm. Badges clipped to belts, dark suits unmarked by agency insignia, they walked through 300 witnesses like water flowing around stones. Lead Agent Morrison held the arrest warrants in a black leather portfolio. Every guest stood completely still, phones raised recording from dozens of angles, creating a digital archive of this moment that would be entered as evidence within 48 hours. Nobody spoke. The only sound was footsteps on marble and the ambient hum of crystal chandeliers. Belinda Fitzgerald walked beside the FBI team until she reached my position near the stage. She stood next to me, didn't speak immediately, just opened the legal folder to show me the arrest warrant header. United States versus Preston Whitfield, Simone Whitfield, Marcus Ashford, and others. The word RICO appeared 3 times on the first page. Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. The federal statute designed to dismantle criminal enterprises that operate across state lines, that hide behind corporate structures, that believe complexity creates immunity. 14 years, Belinda whispered. We finally have them. You never stopped, I said quietly. She closed the folder. Neither did you. Agent Morrison approached the base of the stage steps. He was 52 gray at the temples with the measured bearing of someone who'd executed hundreds of arrests and understood that procedure mattered more than theater. He looked up at Preston and Simone, still standing on the platform where they'd celebrated 9 years of building on stolen ground. Preston Whitfield. Simone Whitfield. Morrison said, voice carrying clearly in the silence. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, forgery, perjury, wire fraud, and violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. He paused. Let the charges settle. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Each charge carried a maximum sentence between 5 and 20 years. The combined exposure was over 60 years. Federal sentencing guidelines for RICO violations rarely resulted in concurrent terms. The mathematics of justice were simple: they would both die in prison. Preston and Simone turned toward each other simultaneously. It wasn't a lover's gaze, not family affection, not even the solidarity of co-conspirators facing shared fate. It was the look of two people who'd built something together and now watched it collapse in real time. Criminal partners realizing their conspiracy had become evidence. Neither spoke. The silence between them contained 20 years. Simone whispered something I couldn't hear from where I stood. Preston didn't answer, just shook his head slightly. First twist. They both stood as if they knew they'd lost, but couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. Was it when Conrad kept the duplicate files in 2004, when Ivy hid the smartwatch in 2023, when Norwood started recording in 2016? When Belinda was forced out in 2011 and began her 14-year wait? When I found Simone's phone in December 2014? When I walked out of Terminal Island in November 2024? When did they lose a question without answer, because the conspiracy collapsed not from one blow, but from 20 years of people they underestimated keeping evidence they never imagined existed? They searched each other's faces for the answer neither possessed. Two FBI agents approached the stage with handcuffs. Standard federal issue restraints, steel with a black powder coating. Preston extended his wrists without being instructed. Simone did the same. 3 seconds later, her movement almost robotic. The metallic click of each cuff closing echoed in the silent ballroom. Preston's watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than my first warehouse lease, caught chandelier light as his hands were secured behind his back. The watch face read 9:09 p.m. In 5 minutes, his life had transformed from corporate celebration to federal custody. 15 feet from the stage, Remy Wexford stood trembling visibly. He watched Preston being cuffed, face pale and wet with tears he wasn't trying to hide. Then he turned to look at me. His expression carried guilt, relief, and a question he didn't voice. Am I forgiven for the years I participated before I knew the truth? I met his eyes and nodded once. Not forgiveness exactly, that would require more time, more conversation, more reckoning. But acknowledgement that Remy had made a different choice when it mattered. That choosing differently, even late, still counted. He closed his eyes, nodded back. The FBI agents led Preston and Simone toward the ballroom exit. The crowd stayed silent. Camera flashes created a strobe effect, freezing the moment into dozens of still images that would appear on front pages by morning. Preston walked toward the exit with his head up, performing dignity like a suit that no longer fit, but still hung in the closet out of habit. Simone looked down, each step smaller than the last, as if walking away from something she could see clearly but could never retrieve. The red gown that had looked elegant 30 minutes ago now seemed garish costume jewelry worn to a funeral. They disappeared through the ballroom doors, flanked by federal agents heading toward vehicles that would take them to the Manhattan Correctional Center for booking and processing. Belinda stood beside me watching the exits. "Do you feel vindicated?" she asked. I considered the question for 10 seconds. Searched myself for the emotional response I'd expected to feel at this moment. Triumph, satisfaction, the rush of victory after 9 years of preparation. Found none of it. Second twist. "I feel nothing," I said finally. Not because I'm cold, but because I felt this 9 years ago for 20 minutes looking at a small black and white photograph of my granddaughter. Belinda turned to look at me. Understanding crossed her face. The moment I'd seen Ivy's photograph, a child I'd never met born while I was in federal prison, raised by Eleonora alone in East LA, while her mother and uncle stole everything that was, when the emotional reckoning had occurred. That was when revenge had transformed into something quieter, more patient, more inevitable. Justice tonight was procedural completion of a transformation already undergone. Belinda's reference to Ivy's photograph hung in the air between us. She understood what I meant the moment I'd seen evidence that my granddaughter existed. Everything changed. Revenge became irrelevant. Justice became inevitable. And somewhere in a small East LA apartment, Ivy was probably asleep, unaware that the recordings she'd made at age 5 had just changed legal history. The burner phone vibrated on the temporary apartment counter at exactly 7:30 a.m., 14 hours after Preston and Simone were taken into federal custody. I answered on the third ring. Belinda's voice carried exhaustion and something that sounded like dark satisfaction. Desmond, the debt bomb just exploded. All 3 banks activated their floating rate clauses at midnight. I sat down at the kitchen table. 20 years. They planted it 20 years ago, and Preston inherited it yesterday. I heard papers rustling on her end. I've been at the federal building since 4 a.m. 3 banking institutions sent notifications simultaneously. The coordination was surgical. What are the numbers? Belinda read from the banking notifications with the precise tone of someone who understood the mathematics of irony. Total outstanding debt across leveraged loans, restructured credit lines, and hidden obligations, $163 million. Vance Global's current market valuation post-scandal, post-arrest, post-public exposure, $140 million. First twist. I did the arithmetic in 3 seconds. He's 13 million underwater. The bomb was planted in 2004, Belinda said. It detonated the day after he was arrested. Perfect timing. He spent 20 years orchestrating a conspiracy to steal a company that was designed to collapse the moment he gained control. Preston had lost his freedom and inherited a financial bomb simultaneously. The architects who'd planted him, Marcus Ashford, the consortium of investors who'd used him as their instrument, never intended to share. They'd built a debt structure that would consume whoever held it when the conspiracy ended. He'd fought for a worthless prize, won it, and discovered winning was just another form of losing. 2 weeks passed in federal courthouse proceedings. Conrad Hawkins pleaded guilty to conspiracy fraud and obstruction in exchange for cooperation and testimony against Marcus Ashford Preston and Simone. He sat in the witness box for 7 hours over 2 days, voice steady detailing 20 years of financial manipulation with the same precision he'd once used to execute it. I kept duplicate files from 2004 through 2015. Conrad testified, because I knew Marcus would eventually sacrifice me. My brother never wanted partners. He wanted instruments he could use and discard. Silas Greenfield testified 3 days later about the DNA fabrication. His voice broke twice, once when describing the $40,000 payment, once when admitting he'd kept the real results in his desk drawer for 9 years, unable to destroy evidence, but too afraid to reveal it. Conrad and Silas testified like men dismantling bombs. They'd helped build, careful narration of every wire, every connection, every choice that seemed small at the time, but compounded into devastation. Both provided complete documentation spanning 2 decades. Bank statements, emails with metadata intact, wire transfer confirmations. The federal prosecution's case became less about proving guilt than organizing the evidence into chronological narrative. A plain envelope arrived at the temporary apartment 2 weeks after the Plaza Gala. No return address. Inside, 4 handwritten paragraphs on prison stationery, Metropolitan Detention Center letterhead visible at the top. I set it on the counter unopened. It sat there for 14 days. White paper aging slightly yellow under the kitchen window light. I walked past it every morning, saw it every time I made coffee, never touched it. 4 weeks after the Plaza Gala, early February, I finally opened the envelope. Conrad's handwriting was precise architectural, the penmanship of a man who'd built financial structures designed to collapse at predetermined moments. The first 3 paragraphs detailed the mechanics of the conspiracy with forensic clarity. Names, dates, dollar amounts, decision points where he could have chosen differently but didn't. The 4th paragraph was different. It began, "I'm not asking forgiveness." Conrad wrote that what he took wasn't money. It was the 9-year period. He knew it couldn't be returned, couldn't be compensated, couldn't be made right through testimony or cooperation or any form of legal penance. But he needed me to know something. "I haven't slept through a single night since you went to Terminal Island. 9 years of insomnia. I know it doesn't balance. I know it's inadequate payment. But it's the only currency I have." The letter ended without signature, as if Conrad's name had become irrelevant to his own confession. Second twist: 9 years of insomnia versus 9 years of imprisonment, an exchange rate that would never balance no matter how precisely Conrad calculated it in his cell at 3 a.m. I read the letter 3 times, thought about Conrad sitting in a federal holding facility, writing this with the same precision he'd once used to forge audit documents. Thought about whether 9 years of sleeplessness equaled 9 years of incarceration. Thought about the mathematics of guilt and whether any equation could solve for what had been taken. Thought about whether keeping the letter served any purpose. I folded it along its original creases. Opened the kitchen drawer where I kept documents I hadn't decided about: my Terminal Island discharge papers, Eleonora's law school diploma that she'd given me last week, Ivy's crayon drawing from 3 weeks ago showing a house with 3 people and a purple unicorn. I placed Conrad's letter inside and closed the drawer with deliberate gentleness. "Some things don't need to be kept," I said to the empty kitchen. "Even when you keep them." The drawer closed with a soft click. I stood there in the kitchen of a temporary apartment that felt less temporary each day. The morning light came through the window at an angle I'd started to recognize, familiar now in a way that surprised me. My phone buzzed. Text from Eleonora. "See, Ivy wants to know if you're coming to her birthday party next week. She's turning 7. She wants to show you something she made." I picked up the phone to respond. For the first time since Terminal Island, the future felt larger than the past. Remy Wexford had been sitting at the corner table for 22 minutes, coffee gone cold, when I walked through the cafe door. The place was nearly empty at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Morning light cut through tall windows, illuminating dust particles suspended in air. Remy had requested this meeting through Belinda 3 days ago, neutral location, morning light, public enough to feel safe. I sat down across from him. Neither of us spoke for 15 seconds. The silence carried the weight of 20 years of manufactured relationship. "Thank you for coming," Remy said finally. "I wasn't sure you would. Belinda said you had something to tell me that couldn't wait." He wrapped both hands around the cold coffee cup. His hands shook slightly. "I knew the DNA truth a month before the Plaza Gala. I didn't learn it from Belinda's reveal. I hacked Preston's email server in late November. First twist." I leaned back in the chair. "You knew before I announced it." I knew everything." Remy's voice was quiet but steady. 20 years of emails. The whole conspiracy documented in their own words. How they fabricated the relationship. How they used me as leverage against you. How they planned to discard me once the company transfer was complete. You read all of it. Every email going back 7 years. It took me 3 days. I didn't sleep. Just read and saved and tried to understand how my entire identity had been constructed as a legal weapon. I watched him carefully. 28 years old. Raised on lies. Finding out through digital forensics that everything he believed about himself was corporate strategy. I stayed silent because I wanted to see who would win," Remy continued. "That's the truth I'm most ashamed of. I kept attending the conspiracy meetings, kept playing my role, kept kept smiling at Preston and Simone while knowing they'd forged every document that said I was your son. You were 28 years old, finding out your entire identity was forged, I said. That's not an excuse. That's context. He finally released the coffee cup. I wanted to see if the people who raised me on lies would beat the man they destroyed. I stayed neutral, observing, collecting information like it was an experiment instead of my life. The moral complexity of the conversation was unlike anything I'd experienced in 9 years. No clear heroes, no simple answers. Just a young man who'd made choices in real time with incomplete information and conflicting loyalties. When did you start cooperating with the FBI? I asked. Remy looked out the window for 5 seconds before answering. From the first week after I found out. Your lawyer Belinda approached me through an encrypted message channel. She knew I'd hacked the emails. She'd been monitoring digital traffic around Preston's server for months. How long have you been working with her? Since early December. I became an inside source. Fed her information while maintaining my cover. Bank account numbers, meeting schedules, Marcus Ashford's travel patterns. I processed this. The outburst at the plaza, Chick, was real emotion planned timing. Remy finished. Belinda said it needed to be public, that my break from Preston had to be witnessed or it wouldn't matter legally. So we planned the moment, but not the words. Everything I screamed at him was true. The theater was just the timing. Remy was simultaneously victim and participant betrayer, and ally complicit and cooperative. The moral mathematics refused to resolve into simple addition. You could have walked away when you found out, I said. I could have. But then you wouldn't have had someone inside providing evidence in real time. Belinda told me that's what tipped the FBI timeline forward by 6 months. Without my access, they would have needed another year to build the case. He met my eyes. I'm not asking forgiveness. I'm explaining. There's a difference. I nodded once. Understanding wasn't the same as absolution, but it was something. 1 week later, federal court ordered Vance Global Logistics return to Desmond Whitfield as rightful founder and CEO. The order came with a detailed audit report that read like a coroner's examination. 3 key executives resigned. 2 major contracts not renewed. Operational credit lines frozen pending fraud investigation. Total outstanding debt $163 million. Current market value uncertain, but substantially less than liabilities. The prize I'd won was ruins. I entered the 34th floor office for the first time in 9 years. Everything was different. Furniture replaced, layout, redesigned, technology upgraded. Even the carpet was new gray instead of the navy blue I remembered, but the harbor window was the same. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking New York harbor container ships moving through channels with the patient inevitability of tides. I sat in the CEO chair. The CEO office felt like a suit, tailored for someone else who happened to have my exact measurements, technically correct, existentially wrong. I turned the chair to face the window. 3 ships visible in the harbor, same as any morning in 2016 when I'd last stood here. The logistics industry hadn't changed its fundamental mathematics. Containers still moved from ship to truck to warehouse to destination. Supply chains still required coordination, timing, trust. But the man calculating those logistics was no longer the same. I found a number in my old contacts, saved from 9 years ago, when the phone was evidence instead of tool. Margaret Caldwell, former Vice President of Finance. Fired in 2016 for asking too many questions about debt structures she couldn't reconcile with revenue projections. She'd been right. The debt structures were designed not to reconcile. I made the call. She answered on the second ring. Margaret, it's Desmond Whitfield. Silence for 3 seconds. Then I heard. The news has been comprehensive. The company's been returned to me by federal court order. It's underwater, understaffed. Most people think it's unsalvageable. I paused. I'm calling to ask if you'd consider coming back as VP of Finance. To rebuild it? Yes. With $163 million in debt and frozen credit lines. Yes. Another pause. I heard papers rustling on her end, the sound of someone already doing the mathematics. When do we start? I asked. Second twist. 5 seconds of silence. Then Margaret Caldwell's voice carrying 9 years of waiting validation and readiness. Oh, now! I hung up and turned back to the harbor window. 3 container ships moved through the channel same as they had in 2016 when I'd last stood here. The logistics hadn't changed. The math was still the math, but the man calculating it was no longer the same. The coffee maker hissed in Eleonora's new Manhattan apartment, while Ivy slept in the bedroom she'd decorated with unicorn stickers last weekend. Eleonora poured 2 cups at 9 p.m. because neither of us slept well yet. She'd relocated from East LA 3 weeks ago, closer to my rebuilding efforts at Vance Global. The apartment was small, but hers no mansion inheritance, no Whitfield estate money, just a 2-bedroom with morning light and a kitchen where she controlled every decision. Ivy finally fell asleep around 8:30, Eleonora said, sliding a cup across the counter. She wanted to wait up for you. I should have come earlier. Dad, you're rebuilding a company from $163 million in debt. She understands. Sort of. She's 7. I took the coffee. It was too hot, but I drank it anyway. Eleonora slid a legal folder across the counter, Belinda's preliminary compensation analysis. Federal wrongful conviction compensation in our jurisdiction capped at $50,000 per year of incarceration. The arithmetic was simple and inadequate. Belinda says federal compensation caps at $50,000 per year, Eleonora said. $450,000 total for 9 years. That's the system. That's not enough. Not for 9 years. Not for what they took. She opened the folder to show me the detailed breakdown. The civil lawsuit against Preston Simone and the others could yield more, but asset recovery from the bankrupt company is uncertain, and it could take years. $450,000 for 9 years. $50,000 per year. $137 per day. $5.71 per hour of life taken and inadequately compensated by a system designed for efficiency rather than justice. The civil suit could take 2 to 4 years, Eleonora continued. More depositions, more hearings, more testimony. Belinda says you'd have to relive the conspiracy repeatedly in front of attorneys who'll try to prove you contributed to your own imprisonment. I know, she watched my face carefully. Is it worth it, more years focused on them? I thought about the mathematics. 2 to 4 years of litigation for uncertain financial recovery. 2 to 4 years of keeping Preston Simone and the conspiracy as the organizing principle of my daily life. 2 to 4 years that could be spent rebuilding instead of relitigating. Eleonora set her coffee down with deliberate gentleness. Dad, do you hold a grudge against them, against Preston Simone, all of it? The question hung between us longer than necessary. I looked at my coffee, the kitchen window, the photographs Eleonora had taped to her refrigerator, Ivy at the park, Ivy, with her unicorn Ivy holding a drawing she'd made of our family. No, I said finally. Eleonora blinked. No. First twist. I chose my words carefully, trying to explain something I'd only recently understood myself. See, our resentment is what you hold when you don't have a plan. I had a plan from day one at Terminal Island. Document everything. Wait for release. Gather evidence. Execute justice. The plan consumed the time that would have been spent on hatred. And now that the plan is done, when the plan ends, everything ends, including the resentment. I turned the coffee cup in slow rotation on the counter. The plan was the antidote. It ate the grudge before the grudge could eat me. Eleonora stared at me across the kitchen counter. When she spoke, her voice carried equal parts affection and concern. "Dad, you sound like a robot." I didn't disagree. Sometimes robots survive when humans don't. Is that what you want, survival? Emotion is expensive. Planning is efficient. I chose efficiency over feeling because feeling would have meant 9 years of nothing but rage. Rage wouldn't have built the biometric veto clause. Rage wouldn't have hired Norwood. Rage wouldn't have waited. Eleonora picked up her coffee, set it down without drinking. But what do they live for after survival? Second twist. Before I could answer, Ivy's voice drifted from the bedroom down the hall. Half asleep, 7 years old, the question cutting through philosophy with the precision of innocence. "Grandpa, are you still here?" I walked to the bedroom doorway. Ivy was barely visible in the dim nightlight glow, purple unicorn stuffed animal tucked under her arm hair, spread across the pillow, in the same pattern as Eleonora's when she was that age. "I'm still here, sweetheart. Are you picking me up tomorrow after school? Mommy said you might." The philosophical conversation about resentment and survival and what robots lived for dissolved into simple logistics. Tomorrow. School. 3:15 p.m. pickup. "Yes, I'll pick you up at 3:15. Ivy smiled in the half-dark. "Can we get ice cream? If you want." "Okay." She rolled over, pulling the unicorn closer. "Love you, Grandpa." "Love you too." I stood in the doorway for 5 seconds longer, watching her settle back into sleep. Her breathing evened out quickly, the complete trust of a child who believed the adults in her life would show up when they said they would. I returned to the kitchen, where Eleonora still sat with her coffee. She didn't ask me to finish answering her question about what robots lived for after survival. We'd both heard the answer from Ivy's bedroom: ice cream tomorrow. School pickup at 3:15. The mundane architecture of a future that didn't require revenge because it was built on something simpler. Eleonora picked up the compensation folder and closed it. "I'll tell Belinda we're not pursuing the civil suit." I nodded. "And the $450,000 is adequate," I said. "Not because it's enough, but because no amount would be." She reached across the counter and squeezed my hand once. We sat in her small kitchen drinking coffee at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. 6 weeks after the Plaza Gala, 6 weeks into a future neither of us had dared imagine during the 9 years when imagination felt like a luxury neither of us could afford. The warmth wasn't triumph. It was simpler than that. It was the absence of the question that had organized 9 years. When will this end? It had ended. What remained was ice cream and school pickups, and the patient work of rebuilding a company that might never be what it was, with a daughter who'd survived her own losses, and a granddaughter who recorded evidence at age 5, and now just wanted to know if Grandpa was coming tomorrow. I was. Every Sunday at 9:30 a.m. The corner booth at the Central Park Diner held the same 2 people, a grandfather and his 7-year-old granddaughter, building a ritual from what was once evidence. 8 months after the Plaza Gala. The waitress knew our order without asking: pancakes for Ivy, coffee, and toast for me. The table by the window was ours. Normalcy built week by week, Sunday by Sunday, through the patient accumulation of small moments that replaced the years when every moment had been stolen. I got a 9.5 on my math test this week, Ivy said, cutting her pancakes into precise squares. Then only half a point away from perfect. My Ms. Rodriguez said that's better than perfect because it means I tried something hard. She looked up from her plate. I think she's right. I think she is too. Ivy recounted her week in the careful detail of someone who knew she was being listened to. Math test. Reading about Einstein in the school library. An argument with a classmate about whether robots could be friends. Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. Ivy said syrup on her chin. Your mother said that exact quote when she was 8. Ivy's eyes widened. Did she? She taped it to her bedroom door, left it there until she went to college. Generational bridge. The conspiracy had tried to sever these connections, tried to make Eleonora believe she wasn't mine, tried to keep Ivy's existence hidden, tried to ensure that knowledge couldn't pass from grandfather to granddaughter. But here we were Sunday morning, talking about Einstein and second-grade math tests. Ivy wiped her chin with a napkin. Her expression shifted to something more serious. Grandpa, does my watch still record things? First twist. I set down my coffee. No, I turned that off months ago. Relief crossed her face like sunrise. Good. I don't like keeping secrets. The smartwatch that had held 47 pieces of evidence now just told time and tracked her steps. Its surveillance function fulfilled and retired. No more need for a 7-year-old to document the adults around her. Transparency restored. Childhood reclaimed. Later that same Sunday, the 34th floor of Vance Global. Ivy sat in the corner chair doing homework math problems and a book report about Marie Curie. I worked at the CEO desk, reviewing contract proposals with the deliberate patience of someone who'd learned that speed creates fragility. The office was slowly filling again. 47 new employees hired in 8 months. First major contract signed 3 weeks ago, modest revenue, reliable terms, nothing leveraged against future collapse. Each hire a brick in the reconstruction, each contract a beam. The company rebuilt not from memory, but from deliberate choice about what to preserve and what to leave in the ruins. I looked out the window at New York Harbor. Container ships moved through the channel the same way they had when I'd started with a single warehouse in Queens 26 years ago. The logistics industry hadn't changed its fundamental mathematics. Containers still needed to move from ship to truck to warehouse to destination. Supply chains still required coordination, timing, trust. But the man watching those ships had been disassembled and rebuilt, component by component, over 9 years. Ivy looked up from her homework. Grandpa, why does your office overlook the harbor? Because I started down there. I turned from the window. I want to remember that every day. Why? Because the view reminds me that building something once means you can build it again, and the second time you know which parts matter. She nodded with the seriousness of a child processing wisdom she'd understand more fully in 20 years. Her attention shifted to my desk. Is this the watch from your dad? My father's mechanical watch sat on the desk corner, where I kept it not worn but present. A 1952 timepiece that had survived 73 years through careful maintenance and deliberate preservation. Yes, he bought it in 1952. Ivy picked it up with reverent care, felt the weight of it, examined the face. Does it still work? Second twist. It still works. She held the watch to her ear, listening to the mechanical tick that had continued for 7 decades, through 2 generations, through wars and recessions and personal catastrophes, through my father's death and my imprisonment and my release. 73 years of continuous motion. Ivy smiled. I like things that still work even if they are old. I looked at my granddaughter, 7 years old, holding a 73-year-old watch, embodying the truth that some things outlast the damage done to them. I do too, child. The watch ticked between us. Proof that things built with care outlast things built with speed. Proof that patience compounds. Proof that what endures isn't always what's newest or largest or most visible, but what's maintained with consistent attention. If you are fighting something that feels impossibly large, remember this: patience is a weapon, documentation is armor, and precision defeats rage every time. The people who wronged me thought I would break under pressure or burn with hatred. I did neither. I waited. I recorded. I prepared. And when the moment came, I didn't need to raise my voice. The evidence spoke. Preston got 18 years in federal prison. Simone got 15. Marcus Ashford got 22. The sentences were adequate not because they matched the damage, but because no sentence ever could. Justice isn't about equivalence. It's about accountability. Conrad got 7 years for cooperation. Silas got probation and community service. Remy got immunity for FBI cooperation. The moral mathematics refused simple addition, so the system did what systems do. It processed each case by its own variables and moved forward. Vance Global holds 47 employees, now modest contracts, sustainable debt restructuring. Not the empire it was. Something smaller, slower, stronger. Something built to last rather than built to impress. Eleonora passed the bar last month. She's considering corporate law. She says someone should understand debt structures well enough to prevent what happened to us from happening to others. Ivy turns 8 next month. She wants a telescope. She's decided she likes space because its patient stars take millions of years to make light that reaches us, but the light always arrives if you wait long enough. The story ends not with triumph, but with a Sunday morning routine, a 7-year-old holding a watch, and the quiet knowledge that some things, justice, family, purpose, still work, even when they are tested beyond what seems endurable. The watch ticks in Ivy's hands. 73 years of continuous motion. I built the company twice now, once in 1999 with ambition, once in 2025 with wisdom. The second version is smaller, slower, stronger. Revenge is temporary. Rebuilding is permanent. And sometimes the greatest victory is simply outlasting what tried to destroy you. And to you, listening to my story, remember this: patience isn't passive. It's the most active thing you can do when the world tries to break you. Looking back, I made mistakes. I trusted without verifying. I built an empire, but didn't protect its foundation. Don't make my mistake. Document everything, trust carefully, and remember that the people closest to you can become your greatest liability if you never question their loyalty. I learned that lesson at Terminal Island, staring at concrete walls for 9 years. But here's what I want you to take from this: revenge isn't about rage. It's about precision. When someone wrongs you, they expect you to react immediately, emotionally. That's when they win. Instead, I chose patience and documentation. I waited for the exact moment when the evidence spoke louder than any accusation. I believe God put me through those 9 years to teach me something I couldn't have learned any other way: that true strength isn't in the fight, it's in the preparation. Justice delayed is not justice denied when you're building it brick by brick. If you enjoyed this story, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. These grandpa stories aren't just about revenge. They're about resilience, patience, and the long game. Leave a comment below telling me what you think about Desmond's approach. Was he justified? Would you have done the same? And if you want more grandpa stories like this one, subscribe to Dad's Revenge Stories. Your support keeps these stories alive. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything. One final note: while this story contains fictionalized elements for narrative impact, the lessons about patience, documentation, and strategic justice are real. May you never need them, but if you do, I hope you remember what worked.